I call this meeting of the Tacoma Park City Council to order. Clerk, please call the roll.
Mayor Williams.
I'm here.
Councilmember Daniels Cohen. Here. Councilmember Grimes.
Here.
Councilmember Mail. Councilmember Schultz. Councilmember Stevens.
Present.
Councilmember Sniffer.
Here.
And I think we're expecting both Councilmember Mail and Councilmember Schultz shortly. Don't have any additional agenda items, just a couple things to point out on upcoming agendas. Next Monday, March 5th, a reminder that we have a work session discussion. This is the continuation of the Tacoma Junction Task Force report priorities. The following Monday, the 12th, there's a discussion of council recognition and honoring members of the Tacoma Park community. That's something that I wanted to put on the agenda. Then just a quick update on the various ward nights. Ward 3 is first up on April 2nd. Ward 5 on Monday, May 5th. Ward 4 on Monday, June 4th. Ward 6 on Monday, June 18th. And tentatively, Ward 1 on Monday, July 9th, and Ward 2 on Monday, July 23rd, so that we will get through all the ward nights before we go on August recess. Also, I will point out for the record that I issued a proclamation declaring September 22nd of this year as Play Day in the city of Tacoma Park. And this urges all citizens to celebrate Play Day and support efforts to build and maintain play spaces and playgrounds in their communities and neighborhoods for the well-being of this and future generations. We will next go to public comment for anybody who'd like to comment on anything that's not on our regular meeting agenda. And if you can come to the podium and identify yourself and keep your comments to 3 minutes, and Mr. Lovelace in the back will go first.
Hello, my name is Pat Lovelace, 7620 Maple Avenue, Tacoma Park, your official peace delegate. One thing I've been thinking a lot about is how can we get community participation in these meetings? We've got all these seats for audience participation. Every so often I hear someone saying, that we've got to do this, we've got to do that for the city, we've got to do something about the speeding on Maple Avenue, we've got to do this, got to do something about the fear of going to the stores in the corner. Well, why don't they come to the meeting and come out and speak about these things? That's what this is for. It'd be nice if we could get, more citizen participation. I don't mean just everybody. I mean everybody. The senior citizens ought to come down, the youth ought to come down, the schools ought to come in. Maybe, they have ideas for us, I'd like to see more about how the Young Activist Club is doing. It'd be great to see them coming in, because they've led the way in Tacoma Park in a lot of areas, and I'd like to see us as a city following suit. That way we can continue leading the nation on a lot of areas. One thing I'd like to see, like I said last week, started up as a good form of citizen participation, is if we got a peace and justice committee going. See, that would be something that this city, I would imagine, would love to participate in, because this is a peace city. It's peace-oriented. It's always been that way. Got a good nuclear-free committee. And I think it'd be great if we had a peace and justice committee. That way we could probably get more citizen participation. I would love to see that, because people aren't going to get anything done if they just sit back and say, let George do it, let somebody else do it. It's just not going to get done. We need more people. We need more activism. We need more people who are concerned about the world around them. And I'd love to see that. So if we can get more citizen participation, more, and it doesn't have to be just in Tacoma Park. Some people, I've heard people say that they didn't like what was going on in Tacoma Park about the speed cameras. They didn't like the traffic stops in some areas. They didn't like the bottlenecks, and they ought to come out and speak about these things. Instead of just sitting at the kitchen table and saying and grumbling, they ought to come out and speak. And another thing, too, is I'd like to encourage people to continue doing is registering to vote, because we definitely have our elections coming up this year, and I'd like to see as many people out there registering to vote as possible this year, because that's a way we can show how we care about our city. Thank you very much. Keep the peace.
Thank you.
Love it, love it, love it.
Other comments?
Jay Keller, 324 Lincoln Avenue in Tacoma Park. We had a meeting last week of the group that had worked on the Martin Luther King Jr. celebrations this year. Very successful event, and the group really wanted to keep that energy going. So we had a discussion about holding a Tacoma Park World Festival, possibly this year, but after a lot of discussion, and we had 4 council members with us this past week, we decided to put it off until next year. But we are going to do a series of events to kind of build support for this World Festival, which we hope to be probably in May or June of next year. We're going to do an event on the 21st of April, playing off of the farm event. Or not, I'm sorry, the 21st of April is going to be a planting and gardening day. We're going to try and get that going and get people involved. On May 6th, we will be out supporting the Tacoma Park Run and talking up the World Festival on that. On June 2nd, we're working on an international community potluck dinner to follow after the Farm Food Forum that's going to be held here in the community center. And then sometime this fall, what we started talking about was holding an event where we had a little bit maybe of a passport concept, and you had to go to one spot in each one of the wards, a walking tour, if you will, to get a stamp on it and to get people out touring the entire city of Tacoma Park and getting to know our community a little bit better. But the group is very committed to having a multiracial, multi-generational, mixed socioeconomic group involved in the planning and in the participation of the World Festival. And so we will be talking to the city staff. I've already been talking to the Recreation Department. The Recreation Committee is supportive of this effort. So we hope to really hold an event that really brings together the diversity that's here in Tacoma Park. We'll keep you informed as we go along.
Thanks, please do. Sounds wonderful.
I'm Karen Vernon from 800 Hayward Avenue, Tacoma Park, and I'm speaking today in support of the grant proposal that our Girl Scout troop, Troop 5831, put forward to the city for Step Up Tacoma, which is a project to link folks who want to volunteer in the city of Tacoma Park with volunteer opportunities in the city or in services that are very Tacoma adjacent, very close to our city residents. It's a project that we have a troop of girls who are going to be working on developing a website that organizations can input their volunteer opportunities into, and at the same time it will be searchable by residents who are looking for volunteer opportunities locally. Thank you very much, and we have a great group of girls who's very eager to work on the project.
My name is Keegan Brand Clay, and I'm the member of the troop that she just spoke about. And I think that besides earning us the Silver Award, which is the kind of big award for the cadet year, it actually would be really helpful because I've been on the county website, and when you search Tacoma Park, you get about one result. And so especially for kids who are looking for SSL hours and, adults too who are just looking for opportunities, I think it would be a really helpful website. And the way we're setting it up, it's very easy. There's filters, and you can fill out information, and then you can find ones that match all of your criteria. And so we have, different categories that different people are researching. So, thank you.
Thank you both. Anybody else?
Hi, I'm Catherine Tunis, President of the South of Sligo Citizens Association. And I'm here because the city has had one meeting so far to talk about a proposed sidewalk on Jackson Avenue, and there's another meeting planned for tomorrow night to talk about sidewalks and a number of other issues on Prince George's Avenue. And as far as I know, the city has not yet set a policy for procedures and going forward with sidewalks. And also, as far as I know, there's been no formal opportunity for public comment on the proposed policy that the city is working on. And so I've gotten questions from two people who are members of SOSCA who are asked me to come here tonight and ask you, why is the city going forward using a policy that has been discussed by council but has received no formal public comment yet and has not yet been established? So if you can help us understand that, that would be great. Thanks.
Thank you. I do know that the resolution adopting the policy is on the rolling agenda for March 26th. I didn't know if the city manager wanted to add anything else on that. Okay, thanks. We will get you some information. Anybody else? Okay, seeing none, we will move along to council comments. Councilmember Daniels-Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor Williams. I'm going to do gold stars again tonight. I'm going to try and do them every week because there's a lot we can hand out. Gold stars tonight going to Chief Rakucci and the Tacoma Park Police Department for the continued drop in crime that his department has produced over the last 6 years. When he came to the table in 2006, he said he was going to get a full complement of officers on the street, and he would also create relationship with other jurisdictions, and all that has come to pass, and it's helped decrease the crime and increase the arrests. In this past year, crime dropped about a little under 15% from 2010 to 2011, and there's a much larger drop since in the last 10 years, close to 50%, maybe a little bit above that. So I'm just sending gold stars out and saying, keep up the great work. I was at the first meeting that he participated in with the city, because there was a rash of armed robberies in the junction, and he said what he was going to do. He walked the walk, and he talked the talk, and it's happened. So 3 quick announcements, and I know there are people going, she doesn't do anything quickly, but I'll try. I'm going to underline what Mayor Williams said. Ward 3, save the date, April the 2nd, 2012. We are the kickoff of all the ward nights, so you'll have the opportunity to come 7 o'clock from 7 to 7:30, have some light refreshments, and I think all the council will be there. I'll be there for sure, so the mayor, the rest of the council will have a moment to chat, and then you get to come into the room in here, and actually the floor is Ward 3's for quite some while. And as I said in some of my emails to the ward, anyone who's afraid to come up to the podium, I'm happy to coach them and work with them and make it happen for them if all they have to do is email me. Just another quick announcement. New Avenue Social is going to be held at the Tiffin Indian Restaurant this Wednesday, February the 29th, beginning at 6 o'clock. And this is a moment for all of us, and I'm going to say through the whole city, but especially Ward 3, Ward 2, and Ward 6, that all of us butt up against the crossroads at Langley. The Tiffin Restaurant is at 1341 University Boulevard. It's going to give you an opportunity to meet neighbors, chat with people, and also taste some pretty good Indian food. So that's a really important one. And now, just a real quick, I'm going to call it a virtual tour. I guess it's not really virtual tour of the junction. And the Tacoma Junction offers another niche business called Kinetic Artistry. The mysterious business is sandwiched in between Roland's Unisex Barbershop and the Liberty gas station. It's a serious theater shop for people who need their stuff right now. A comment from a patron. I went in a couple of weeks ago looking for wigs and some sketches we were doing, and not only did they have wigs there, but they pulled out an entire catalog and said as long as you put in an order before 2 p.m., we can likely get it to you by 2 p.m. the next day. I call that real customer service, and I know this is like a secret business. Not everybody knows what goes on at Kinetic Artistry. Another remarkable niche business. They're the largest makeup supply house in the Mid-Atlantic. Last week I told you about Healy Surgeons. This week this is the largest theater supply house in the Mid-Atlantic. They stock makeup for theater, video, film, and everyday wear, plus costumes. This is a place to check out whether you're in theater, or in the theater business, or just in the Halloween business. Again, one of a kind store that's actually located in our very own city in Tacoma Junction. Thank you.
Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you. I have a few announcements of my own. Starting with that the Tacoma Park Presbyterian Church will be holding a meeting on their community commercial kitchen plans that is going to be this Sunday afternoon, March the 4th, from 4 to 6 p.m. at the church gym, which is on Tulip Avenue between Maple and Willow Avenues. So the church would like to open a community commercial kitchen which would help meet food needs and create economic opportunity for people in the community. Also, I'd like to make sure that everyone knows that nominations are open now for the Azalea Awards. It's an annual award cycle produced by the Tacoma Foundation and the Tacoma Voice. You have to get your nominations in by midnight on February 29th, which is this Wednesday. The easiest way to submit a nomination is to go to the Tacoma Foundation website, which is tacomafoundation.org. And the Azalea Awards ceremony will be on April 28th here in the Community Center. Also relating to the Tacoma Foundation, their spring grant cycle is open now. Applications are due by March the 20th, 5 p.m. Those are grants that support community organizations, neighborhood associations, and so on. So it's a great opportunity to get some funding for your organization. And then the last thing, not an announcement, I wanted to recognize that contrary to a report in the press about last week's council meeting, Deputy City Manager Ludlow did provide written responses to questions that I had posed relating to the pending draft memorandum of understanding between the city and the State Highway Administration, for which I thank Ms. Ludlow. Thank you.
Councilmember Schultz.
Some of you may have noticed I was not at the city council meetings the last two sessions, and I realize I may have missed some spirited discussions, so I regret that. But while I was away, I was in France visiting my son, and who lives there, and I had I thought what I'd like to do would take a minute to kind of share some experiences. They're just really, I don't have an agenda or a point to make here. If it's a point, I guess it would be to suggest that there's different ways by which different Western democracies solve their problems. For example, I had the occasion to need to see a doctor while I was there. Turned out I was able to see an MD who was also an osteopath, and because I was in a great deal of pain, but I went to see this physician who saw me kind of on very, very short notice, within a matter of hours, and I asked her what the fee was going to be, and she said, oh, it would probably run about $25 to $40 for this office visit. So my son went because he needed to do the translation. Although the doctor spoke some English, enough to get by, and she asked me a few questions, and asked me to get up on the table and took care of, did some maneuvering on my body. But it turned out the way that it all got handled was that my son said to the doctor, well, just use my name as the patient rather than my father's name, and that way my health plan will cover it. So he did, and she did, and so it was no cost to me. She wrote me 2 prescriptions, took them across the street, and I went to the cash register to hand them some euros, and they said, no, this is all paid for. It's all covered under the health plan. So I asked my son, I said, what's this, how does this work? He says, well, I have to pay, my premiums, health premiums are 27 euros a month, which works out to about $36 to $37 a month that he pays as a single individual for his health care. And if he wants to get gold-plated dental work, then he has to pay something more for that. But that covers his dental work and his basic health needs and wellness needs and that sort of thing. And in the event where he has a catastrophic illness, serious injury, or cancer of that nature, he said it's all covered 100% under a universal health plan there. So I thought, wow, this is really nice because it didn't cost me anything, and even if I had paid my way, it would have been nominal compared to what we are used to when we have an office visit, and then we see what the insurance coverage was, and it goes into the hundreds of dollars to see a doctor for 30 minutes if you're lucky. The other thing is my son's daughter goes to college there. She chose to go to a private university run by the Catholic Church, and her annual tuition and room and board runs between about $4,000 a year, and that's because she chose to go to a private university. So her mother and her father were paying for that amount of money for her to go to that college. But had she chosen to go to what we would call a public university, there wouldn't have been any expense at all. Any student who is qualified to go to college, and it's very rigorous to get into college in France, gets a free ride. There's no cost to anybody, any student, to be able to go to college. And now, of course, not everybody gets to go because it is a very challenging set of examinations they have to go through when they graduate from high school. I also thought it was very interesting, since we have a purple line in our future here in Tacoma Park, that the city of Brest, where my son lives, which is a city of about 250,000 people, it's a big port on the Atlantic Ocean, a nuclear submarine base, a Navy base, and things like that. The last 3 years, they've been building a tram that runs completely across the city. They've closed a lot of streets in order to make way for the tram, and that's about ready to open up this summer. Looks very much, it's a two-rail thing. It's a streetcar system like we're talking about for the Purple Line, and they were out testing cars when I drove there, or when I saw it. It's a very attractive-looking thing. But the basic philosophy that's behind that, I was told by people who know about it, that they are trying to keep the growth of the city compact. They don't want it to spread out into the agricultural areas, and they're trying to reduce the reliance on automobiles. And so they felt like building this tram system would reduce the reliance on automobiles, because gasoline in France these days runs about $8 a gallon. So that's why you see a lot of really, really small cars over there. So that's going on. And the final observation, which I found very amusing, is that while we're very conscientious about our dogs and keeping them on leashes and keeping them cleaning up after dogs, and we have dog parks, and we like to argue about whether we should have one or where it should be, they don't bother with that. They just let their dogs run free. I don't know how they get away with it. The dogs romp through the parks, they run up and down the streets and across the streets. Nobody uses leashes, and nobody cleans up after their dogs. As a responsible citizen, you have a responsibility to watch where you walk. So, it's, as I say, there's some very nice things about living in France, and there's some distractions as well. But every time I go there, and I've been going there for 18 or 19 years since my sons lived there in that country, it's been a very educational and always a revealing process. So I thought I would share that with you as I gradually get back into the swing of things on this side of the Atlantic Ocean, which is where the important stuff is really happening.
Thank you for that tour. I know...
When will you be moving?
I don't know.
And I know they also take their dogs into all the restaurants.
Yes, yeah, dogs are pretty much welcome inside shopping centers and stores and all of that, and they just come and go, and it's kind of nice in that respect. They're a little bit more relaxed about whatever it is that people are afraid of when it comes to dogs inside of commercial establishments.
I'll add just one quick comment that I had the pleasure of attending the Cub Scout Pack 33 Pinewood Derby Saturday night, and that's an annual event, and I've been there the last couple of years, and it's always nice to see kids and their parents who have built the racers and enjoy friendly competition, and it's for design and speed, and they go on to other levels, and everybody had a great time, so that was always nice to see. Seeing no other council comments, does the city manager have any comments?
I just wanted to remind everyone that the community center will be closed on Wednesday from 11 to 1 for our annual employee recognition event. The library will be closed as well during that time period, but the police department, as always, will be open.
Okay, and we do not have any minutes to adopt, so we'll go to the scheduled presentations. And the first one is from the Washington Adventist Hospital Land Use Committee, and they're going to brief us on their questionnaire results.
Good evening.
Welcome.
I'm Ann Hollander. I'm co-chair along with David Paris, who's joining us this evening, of the Washington Adventist Hospital Land Use Committee. And the committee recently developed a questionnaire that was sent out to city residents. Oh, I guess I should first say that I am a proud resident and owner in Ward 5 of the city. So we created a questionnaire to solicit community feedback on the proposed relocation of the Washington Adventist Hospital and the possible redevelopment of the hospital's current Tacoma Park campus. I'm going to read largely from the report that you all should have at this point, just so the folks at home will have a sense of the outcome of our report, and so that they don't have to go through it. But the report should be available on the Tacoma Park website for anybody that wants to look at all of the details. The Washington Adventist Hospital has operated at its current location near the intersection of Carroll and Flower Avenues in Tacoma Park for over 100 years. It has requested permission from the Maryland Healthcare Commission to relocate to the White Oak Fairland area of Montgomery County, and the request was considered over the summer of 2011 during an evidentiary hearing presided by a member of the commission. The hearing examiner was expected to issue his recommendation in early 2012, but tragically, Commissioner Worthington passed away last week, and our committee extends its condolences to his family and colleagues. We're not really sure how this will affect the timing of the commission's decision on the certificate of need, but in any event, we have developed a questionnaire to provide the City Council with input from community members, recognizing that the opportunity to respond to the hearing officer's recommendation before deliberation of the full commission is limited. Individuals responding to the questionnaire were asked to comment on their interest in maintaining health care services on the site, to prioritize identified proposed health care services, and to indicate their support of new land uses and redevelopment options. I should emphasize that this is not a scientifically conducted survey. The people were, volunteered to respond because they might have an interest in the subject matter, had received the questionnaire in the mail. So keep that in mind as you're reviewing the results. Nevertheless, for those people that felt moved to respond, it does give a picture on people's concerns, and it engages the community in our efforts to outreach to the community to engage them in a community discussion about the overall process. The copies of the questionnaire were inserted in the December 2011 edition of the Tacoma Park newsletter and were distributed to 7,162 households in Tacoma Park by the Postal Service. Community members were encouraged to complete the questionnaire and return it to the Tacoma Park Community Center, and individuals were given the option of completing the questionnaire online, and the questionnaire was made available in both English and Spanish. 487 questionnaires were completed, 369 paper questionnaires, and 118 online questionnaires, of which 446 were completed by Tacoma Park residents. A majority of the 487 respondents indicated that they lived in Tacoma Park. 41 respondents indicated that they don't live in Tacoma Park, which constitutes nearly half of the 19% that were not able to identify the ward or did not identify which ward they lived in the questionnaire results. 45% indicated that they lived in wards 2, 3, and 5, immediately adjacent to the hospital site. And 20% of the respondents work in Tacoma Park, and 6% own a business or a commercial property in the city. So briefly, the first question asked respondents to discuss healthcare services that should remain on the Washington Adventist Hospital site. Just over 90% of the respondents to this questionnaire stated that healthcare services should remain on the site in the event the hospital relocates to White Oak, with urgent care and primary care services identified as being of greatest importance. Emergency care and women's health care services were frequently identified by respondents as priority health services that should remain on the campus if the hospital were to relocate. What are health care services that should be established on the Washington Adventist Hospital site? The community indicated that a health and fitness center, general health and wellness services, and physical medicine were among the highest options given for the establishment of new healthcare services on the campus in the event the hospital relocates. The establishment of new clinical trial beds and the continuation of sleep lab services were ranked as being the lowest priority. When asked about their support for on-site expansion options, if the Maryland Healthcare Commission were to deny WA's request to relocate to White Oak and decided to expand its operations on-site, nearly half of the respondents indicated support for the creation of a dual campus, with the hospital continuing to provide services, albeit at possibly a lower level, and if necessary, the construction of additional buildings on the campus. 1/5 of the respondents did not support either of the options that were presented in the questionnaire, which was an expansion of the existing site or dual campus options. Support for new development options. Health services, active and passive open space and recreational facilities, mixed-use development, and educational services were identified as being desired development options if the hospital were to close its Tacoma Park facility and the property became available for other uses. Non-mixed-use single-family homes or multifamily residences were identified by respondents as the lowest priority option. Community priorities for council action. This is a question that we developed to specifically provide advice to the council on which ways the city might approach the commission. Of the concerns raised by the City Council with the Maryland Healthcare Commission, provision of 24-hour urgent care services and primary care practitioners were identified as being of the highest importance to respondents. Also of importance was the provision of health care services for individuals with a broad range of income. This survey provides the council with some understanding of respondent preferences for development and use of the site, depending on the various outcomes that may result from the decision of the Maryland Healthcare Commission. In the briefing that you received, we broke down by ward the various responses to each of the questions and sort of overall people's concerns, which are very interesting to read through. There's a wide range of opinions on this, and our committee really regards this as one of the opening discussions that we hope the community will have as a whole as this procedure progresses. And I'd like to thank the members of our committee who are here this evening and those that weren't able to join us, and we're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
First, thank you and all the committee for your work on this. It's very helpful to have this information. Was there anything that surprised the committee? Come on up.
Trevor Delafield. I hadn't expected to make any comment, but that's a very good question, and I felt like I needed to respond to something that had kind of jumped out at me, and that is in the personal comments, which Ann just referred to as something we feel is quite valuable, and it is arranged by ward, as Ann has said, and I hope that that will be helpful to each of the council members as you look at the comments from people in your ward. But one of the things that jumped out to me is, as Ann has said, there's a wide range of opinions and preferences and feelings. And one of the things that I hadn't really thought about, but as you asked the question, I think it's quite surprising how strongly held even widely divergent opinions were. And I think that's maybe to be expected, but it is noteworthy, I thought.
There were quite a number of responses, in my opinion, looking at it, that seemed to be looking for more engagement with the council and the city to discuss this in greater detail. I think that stuck out in my mind. But, you can look at this through your own glasses, like whatever your preferences or interests are reflected in the broad range of responses that we received. So because it's not a scientifically conducted survey, we really tried to avoid creating definitive conclusions here and just provide you with as clean a synopsis of the results as we could and the raw data to the extent we could capture.
Mm-hmm. And I think maybe there was another response.
My leg is falling asleep, and I have an ache in my back.
I think maybe we'll have to send you to France for...
Right, it does sound like a good option. And I actually, as a physician, the French healthcare system is actually wonderful in many regards. So I would echo what Councilman Schultz was saying. But one of the things, I'm Troy Jacobs. I am a resident of Ward 5, and I am a physician. And one of the things that struck me about the questionnaire and also the deliberations that the committee has had, as well as the city council, is just the keen interest in health issues. I'm speaking as a pediatrician that for 15-plus years has taken care of poor and vulnerable families. And so I certainly think about how we provide health services. And so it was reassuring to see that there were many residents that were interested in these issues. But what concerns me, and this is not something that I have an answer for, but I will put back on the table as I have before in previous discussions, is that there appears to be a disconnect between the discussion, the rhetoric, and the resources. And I think we've identified that in terms of the hospital, but it also needs to be thought of in terms of government. I mean, increasingly I've seen local government be pulled into healthcare issues. And I think that that's something to think about. I mean, when I joined this committee, I thought I was joining a land use committee, that would be exploring a range of issues. And so it was interesting to see how much of our discussion was framed and really influenced by the Certificate of Needs process. And, I mean, it was mesmerizing to me because I come at this from a very different perspective in terms of what the Certificate of Need can do and sort of what is the local mandate. I mean, in Montgomery County, we are in an environment of 11 of the 49 hospitals in the state are here in the county. There is an oversaturation of practicing physicians and nurses here. And so the hospital is having to respond, not just Washington Adventist, but a number of hospitals to this. Now, having said that, if you look at the Maryland Healthcare Commission's recent report on hospital beds, you'll see that in Montgomery County, we've actually increased the number of beds. And the Adventist Health Care System has also increased the number of hospital beds. But now, what has that meant for Washington Adventist Hospital? Actually, I went and looked at the numbers, and over the period from 2002 to 2011, although during that same period Adventist Healthcare increased the number of hospital beds, the Adventist Hospital went from 338 to 281. So despite what the Certificate of Need process can do, health systems will respond to the economic realities regardless. And so I think we need to think of that as we're thinking through these options. You know, what I could easily see happening as we go forth is that regardless of the outcome of the Certificate of Need process, the hospital comes back to us and says, this is what we're going to put on the table. Now, what are you going to put on the table? And I don't think that the city has really thought through that in terms of resources and incentives, and we need to be thinking about that. And so I would say that there are two questions that I think we need to think about going forward, and that one is, what is the city council's role in health care? And then two, what I would really hope for us to do, and this gets back to the Land Use Committee, is what is our vision for how land is to be used in the city? For not just the hospital, but broadly. I mean, this comes up in a number of situations, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments.
Any other?
Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you, Mayor. And I want to thank the committee again for their work. I found this, as you suggested, fascinating for many of the reasons you were talking about, both in the comments, the answers to the questions, and in the comments. And I too noted the strongly held opinions, but this is Tacoma Park, and that sort of comes with the territory here. And then people will change and have strongly held positions on exactly the opposite to what they said. I think that one thing to keep in mind about the Washington Adventist Hospital issue in general is that the city doesn't, we don't really provide them with anything in particular. They get police protection and, some other city services, but there isn't any direct link there. And they pay a small amount in taxes. They have contributed to a number of city things and are, they're a member of the community and so on. And of course, as a hospital, they provide a wonderful benefit to the residents of Tacoma Park. We would like them to stay. They have told me, anyway, and others as well, repeatedly that the site is too small. They need to expand, and the site is too small, and that that's why they want to move, so they can have a bigger site. They continue to say they want health and wellness and other sorts of good things. They have a vision for what they want on the site, but we don't seem to be able to get them to commit in writing to exactly what they're going to put on the site. So I think the city's role, and the residents' role too, is to continue to push them hard to do that, to specify exactly what they mean in that very lovely vision they have. What does it mean concretely, What will actually be there? And so, and I think our role is to continue to push for that. And not just for Ward 5, but for all of Tacoma Park. I'll stop there. That's good.
Councilmember Schultz?
Yeah, I want to also say thank you deeply for the work that you guys on this committee put into this, to doing this survey. And I appreciate that it's not, quote, a statistically valid survey, something that would be done by the Gallup poll. But notwithstanding, I think it's extremely informative. It tends to confirm some suspicions that I had. But, you can have all the suspicions and ideas and sit here and think, I know exactly what it is the citizens of Tacoma want, and be totally wrong. And it's nice to get some, real-world information back. And this is what this report does. In fact, I read just about every page of it today because I got reading these comments and couldn't put them down. It's good reading, let me tell you. I do think that one of the weaknesses in the survey is that some of the comments seem to indicate people didn't really understand what like a wellness village is and some of the other terminologies that were used in the survey. And I'm not entirely sure I know what a wellness village is. And or what an urgent, I think we all have suspicions of what an urgent care thing is and all that sort of thing. But for this kind of a purpose, I think that was okay. That does tell us that one of the responsibilities that we have here going forward is to do a good job of just educating our residents as to what are all these medical definitions about, so that we are all at least on the same page when we debate. I'd also point out that there seemed to be, while the strong feeling was that people want the hospital to stay, and that emergency care services and urgent care services and women's health services are really among the most vital things that are wanted. There's a sharp division of some people that just want it to go away and disappear for whatever reasons. There's scattered reasons. The information that I've gotten and we've gotten is that, at least very preliminarily, is that the powers that be with the Washington Adventist healthcare system is that the city of Tacoma Park historically has just been unalterably opposed to the expansion of the hospital. And this grew out of an issue with regard to proposed underground parking that came up 10 or 12 years ago, I'm told, at the time when I wasn't paying attention. And they sort of took that to mean that the city itself was taking a stand against the future of the hospital, which was completely untrue. I'm just wondering out loud that I wonder if it would make sense to share this survey, just as you presented it to us, just without, as you said, you're not making recommendations, you're not trying to point anybody in any direction, to share it with the executives of the hospital, to kind of help them understand that when we say we're interested, very interested, we're deep, grave concerns about what's going to happen on that site. Whether the hospital stays by the order of the Healthcare Commission or whether it's permitted to relocate to White Oak. One way or the other, this city council is going to have a lot of work on its hands. Because if they stay, we don't want the hospital to close and just sort of roll up the carpets and disappear into the night. We want them to remain a vital part of our city and hopefully to expand But if, of course, if they do relocate, then we have a huge issue, albeit different. So either way, we're going to be heavily engaged in healthcare here, whether we like it or not. I mean, up until a few months ago, I think most of us sort of assumed that this healthcare commission process was a sort of a formality, but then we came to find out that no, in fact, there's strong cases to be made for keeping the hospital here in the city, and so that it's hard to guess. I can't even begin to imagine what the outcome is going to be, and I don't think anybody knows or can guess. And now that the commissioner, his death has thrown more things into question. So I definitely see that we're going to be here as a city council heavily engaged, and we have a responsibility to use this information, take advantage of it, and to help our residents and business owners get more fully engaged in the discussion about the future of that site. So again, there's 2,000. I think there's something like 2,000 jobs. Is that correct at that hospital?
Does anybody know?
Something like 1,500. I think it could be 2,000.
Yeah, the 2,000 is the number I've heard, which makes it by far, obviously, the largest employer in the city. That's, losing that. I mean, realize that not all of those people live in Takoma Park, but that's a very, very vital part of our economic base here. And many of the people, the respondents, commented that one of the reasons they moved to Takoma Park is because of the existence of the hospital. And I know as a resident, an older resident who isn't planning to move anytime soon, having that hospital nearby is a huge comfort. So thank you very much for this work.
Sure. Can I respond to a couple of your points?
Yeah, please.
Well, one is the jargon it's a point well taken. If you can look at the survey results as sort of a snapshot in time, the questions were really developed specifically to assist you in responding to the Certificate of Need outcomes, and the questions are really patterned on specific letters that the council had provided to the commission. And that's why there's some jargon in there, but it's a point well taken that, and some of these are really not medical terms. They're terms that have been coined by Washington Adventist Hospital, particularly when we're talking about this village of health and well-being. Some of the operational areas that are in their rough plans, and those are not necessarily, as we've been informed by some of our own members, including Dr. Jacobs, they're not typically, industry standard terms as we would understand them. So, and also, if we're handing out gold stars this evening, I'd really like to commend Sarah Daines and her very able team for all the work and their assistance with managing this survey. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to you and the committee for all your work on this. This is a good document and very helpful as we look to what the community is really thinking. I just have one concern with the document, and that is the imbalance between wards and the results and the respondents. I see that wards 1, 2, and 3, which we typically think of as the higher income portions of the city, comprise 52% of the respondents, while wards 4, 5, and 6, which are typically thought of as lower income neighborhoods, is 20% of the respondents. Mm-hmm. Did you all discuss that and maybe how you could increase or improve the outreach to those neighborhoods?
Yeah, we did discuss this at length, and in fact, Jackie, do you want to we had a particular outreach to some portions of that community in, which wards? Ward 5?
Yeah, I'm not clear about the wards, but we did notice the imbalance And it does suggest the extent of the outreach and the community education that, our committee has to do. I was particularly interested in the Hispanic community because it's that income group, the working class and the lower income, who really depend on the hospital. So we made an effort to get responses from Mary Center. And we were successful in getting some, but there I noticed that a number of the clients there didn't even realize that the hospital was in the process of getting approval to relocate. So we have some work to do. And we have discussed it, and we have to really get into detail about how we're going to outreach to those communities. The other thing I would suggest, and this is my own observation, we need more diversity on our particular committee. We have, the representatives are, predominantly white. There are 2 African Americans. There are no Latinos at all. And I think that really needs to be corrected. So I put that before the council. We need some leadership from the other communities.
I thank you. You've, I think, said everything I was planning to say, so thank you very much.
Okay.
And thank you very much, Ms. Davison. Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you. So you've neatly set the table for my question, which is, what are the, by the way, thank you from myself as well. And I'll note that I worked with Mr. Delafield on a previous committee, the Health Services Impact Committee, that looked at many of the same issues. I think that was 4 or 5, 6 years ago, and Mr. Paris also. So my question is, what are the Land Use Committee's plans going forward, and what kind of assistance can the council give you in carrying out those plans?
Well, we are really sort of in the early stages of community outreach and have not formulated any detailed plans at this point. We would really appreciate some guidance from the council on the directions in which you would like to see us move in that area. We've spent really now a number of years coming up to speed on the whole certificate of needs process, the hospital statements of their intended future uses of the site, and just it's a very detailed, as you know, process to come to grapple with. And so we've largely completed that educational phase. But as the certificate of need process is now coming towards a conclusion, we realize that now is the time to really reach out to the community. And so any guidance you can give us as we formulate those plans moving forward, we would really appreciate.
I'll offer one thought, which is, as you are certainly very aware, Washington Adventist Hospital isn't the only health services provider in the community. You mentioned yourselves the Mary Center, so we do have Catholic Charities, we have Mobile Med, we have services offered through the county Department of Human Services. I'm not sure that's what it's actually called, but in any case, I believe that there's a Montgomery County Healthcare Coalition. So we, as a city, can potentially look to other providers and to fill gaps that Washington Adventist Hospital leaves behind it. We don't have to rely only on what Adventist healthcare system might leave behind. And I do note that Adventist healthcare does fund some of those other third-party efforts for reasons that make a lot of economic sense for them. The most effective and most cost-effective and service-effective delivery models don't always involve emergency rooms, which is where portions of the population, including ones that have needs that are not met through the channels that people like most of us take for granted, where they turn is to the emergency rooms. So understanding what other organizations there are in the community or that could potentially be brought into the community as partners to offer health services within the city of Tacoma Park if the Adventist Hospital does relocate could be something that would be very useful for the committee to pursue. It's not it's not a land use thing, but it's a health services
No,
thing.
I mean, we've necessarily gotten engaged in this whole certificate of need process because it will sort of segue into the more strictly land use areas, but that's very helpful, and we certainly will add that to our agenda.
Councilmember Daniels-Cohen.
I'd also like to thank you for the hard work. I mean, I know this was a massive job, and reading the comments, that was what struck me, was from one end, minus one standard deviation, all the way to plus, all the way, the whole bell-shaped curve is in here. There's some hater bunnies and some people who just love it. I got to say, I got my first stitches of my whole life in 1955 in the emergency room of what we then called...
1955?
It was 1955. What we then called the Washington Sanitarium, and because that was the name of it in those years, that slowly has emerged as the Washington Adventist Hospital. I was also going to say, what can we as a council do to support and assist you in your work? I know that's underlining someone else's comment. I had the opportunity to serve in the Tacoma Junction Outreach Task Force, and we were able to outreach to upwards of 300, between 200 to 300 people that we actually touched personally. And I'm happy to work with you all to see how we can, and was it tedious? And time-consuming, yes, but it still got, there were enough of us to cover the whole, the whole area that all the people around the junction, and it did take some time and effort, but I'm happy to give you that plan and even help you if you need some assistance.
Well, I appreciate that. I hope you can appreciate as well that we're talking about the entire city of Tacoma Park that would be involved, the limited time and resources of our committee. So to the extent that you want broad outreach to particular populations or targeted populations, we're going to have to find some resources from the city to assist the committee in handling that type of broad outreach or targeted outreach. There are some, good Samaritans on the committee that are willing to go out and do a one-on-one, and spend a lot of time, but it's hard to see. We would need some clear direction on, drawing on those resources at this point. So any thoughts that you have on ways that we can approach the larger community? I mean, we've discussed expanding a little portal on the city's website to provide information, but again, there's certain populations that really won't even use that as a resource. So creating some type of brochure with some general information might be an idea, one that we've discussed that might come into place once we have more specific details, but that will have to evolve as we figure out which direction this is headed in following the Certificate of Need process.
But again, just a great read. It was a great read. It was almost like reading a Michener novel here.
So I encourage people to look at these specific comments on the website. They are entertaining to read. They're interesting. They give you an idea of what the community is thinking about at this stage. So.
And it looks like we've got some follow-up comments from Councilmember Snipper, then Siemens, then Schultz.
Thank you, Mayor. And I appreciate Seth's call for, what we could do going forward, because I think that's next steps are always what we should be focusing on when we get something like this. I want to make a couple of comments. One is it's hard to appreciate this when you're in the midst of it, but the city really needs people who are knowledgeable about what's going on. It's difficult for the council to do it. We have so many issues. It's hard for staff to do it. The staff are very stretched. And as you know, it takes a lot of time and energy to get up to speed on these issues. But more importantly, we need local experts who know the community and know the issues. Tacoma Park's a unique place. It's not that easy to understand what's going on here. So I'm really delighted that you guys have continued to work on this, because you do provide that. I know you may not think of yourself that way, but that is what's going on here. And finally, not quite finally, the hospital, if it does leave, we will need people for the land use part. As you know, originally we thought this was all going to go way more quickly than it turned out to. So we will have a need for folks who understand land use in its very broadest sense, not just literally land use, but all the issues about what's to be there and so on. And the council will look to the committee to provide that kind of information and leadership. And finally, I really think outreach is a great idea. It's been a struggle getting information out to folks. As you were indicating, there are many people who don't even know the hospital's planning to leave. You know, I remember after they did the renovation of the emergency room, I had a number of residents tell me, I guess the hospital's decided not to leave because they, spent all this money on, refurbishing that. But they are trying to leave, and the community needs to be involved. They need to be informed. They need to be brought into the process. So I really encourage the outreach idea. I think that's a terrific way to go.
Councilmember Stevens?
Thank you again, Mayor. I was reminded that one of the problems that I've seen in talking with my constituents who do serve on some of the committees is that they don't have computers, and a lot of the communications among committee members go on computers. And I'm not saying this is necessarily a problem with just the Land Use Committee. And I know that even receiving notifications of meetings, most times those notifications go out by email. I know the city clerk is very good at trying to help bridge that gap, but it's something I think this council needs to think about as far as what might be better ways, whether we get one of these robocallers that we all hate so that people can receive phone messages that meetings are upcoming or things like that. I think it's a problem that we need to solve. It's one part of why we have difficulty with participation from some of the community members. Thank you.
Councilmember Schultz?
I just wanted to ask, in terms of developing resources to expand your capacity, have you had any interaction with CHEER, Bruce Baker's organization? Because I know they've done some very grassroots work with on the issue of health services in Tacoma Park.
No, to the extent that the council has some suggestions for us of resources, we would welcome them. This is really our first major effort towards any sort of community outreach, having largely just done this educational process for the committee itself for the last number of years. So we would welcome any ideas you have.
Yeah, I think that's an organization that you may want to the extent that you want to, enrich the database and the information that you've already started to create. Plus, I think there's other community people who are organized who are involved in community organizing in a sense, who have peculiarly gotten themselves in touch with specific ethnic groups and nationalities and language groups in the city. Those might be some doorways for you to use to get access to some of the folks in the city who are in the lower economic echelons.
Right, and the other challenge is framing the message to use for the outreach. I mean, at this point, everything's still in flux. We don't really have a clear message from the committee or the city to provide, but that's why we should have some idea in place of how we will move forward once there's some information to share. But I think in reading through the comments, you'll see there's some kind of interest in maybe community forums or some kind of general conversation, and we might give some thought to that at these earlier stages as a method of drawing out people who have an interest in the issue as a next step.
Yeah, I just want to say, I realize that you're far surpassing the original mandate as a land use committee going and doing this kind of work. But I think all of us are finding that because this process has gotten so protracted, and then now it's not a fait accompli that they're going to move. In fact, they may stay, and it's just become much more complicated than we even thought it was. So all of us are kind of being stretched, but that's what we need. We sort of have to do that, and I greatly appreciate, as I said before, your efforts in that regard. This is tremendously helpful.
Good, great.
And I'll go to Councilmember Grimes, and then I'll try and wrap this up.
Right. I had a comment on the outreach, but first I realized I was mentioning members whom I served with on the Health Services Impact Committee, and I neglected one other in the room, which is Mr. Pat Lovelace in the back, who brings a distinctive and unique perspective on health services needs in the community. On outreach, my comment is just simply, I think I'm hearing you say this, it's important to have something to either ask people or to tell people. Otherwise, you're not going to engage them, and potentially you're even going to turn them off for when you do have something to ask or tell them. So it's something to think about, as you were saying, Ms. Hollander, the message that one would have when doing outreach, and on the other side of the message is what you might be asking from people whom you're contacting. Thank you.
And I'd like to just provide a couple wrap-up comments on, I think, things we need to do and where we go next. I think it's going to be very helpful to have the certificate of need process results, which will, in some ways, make it a little easier to concentrate on where we need to go and what we need to do. I think we can publish a summary of the survey in the newsletter. Since we have the survey in the newsletter, I think it would be very helpful to get it back out to people. And we can provide a link, information in there about how to get the rest of the information about the details, the comments, if people want to get those. I think we can certainly, as the city, provide a copy to the hospital. And I think what we'll need to do next is coordinate with the committee on outreach and next steps. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
And we will be back in touch.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, we will move next to the presentation from the Small Community Grant Committee and recommendation for small grant awards. If you want to come up here, that's fine. Good evening.
I'm Julie Evans from Ritchie Avenue, Ward 4. Jacqueline Schick from Ward 3, Sheridan Avenue. And Franca Brilliant couldn't be here tonight. Before we start, I wanted to thank Jesse Carpenter for coordinating this. I know we are trying to get this so the grants can be awarded by and completed by the June 30th. She worked very hard to expedite this, and we met on President's Day at my house, and I think she came in and got some information out to us on the holiday. So I wanted to thank Jesse. Okay. So the budget is only $7,500, and we had 12 proposals that were had some merit, and it was rather a challenge to go through and try to figure out what was the best way to spend that money and make our recommendations. So we went through every proposal, weighed
what, how many people would be helping the guidelines of the proposal, and we made our recommendations based on a number of factors. I think, the one that we recommended for full funding was the Piney Branch Elementary School Association PE swim class. That's going to benefit 450 students across, the whole range of the population. Had very strong support from the PTA, and for that one we recommended $1,400. Going back to where we hit the first one, the Tacoma Park Girl Scout Troop 5831 has this project called Step Up Tacoma to develop an outreach to get a website and get an activity, community outreach to engage the community and getting volunteers to help with a number of projects. And that one, after, it said the number of projects, we thought a key amount was $1,500, which was $1,000 for the website and $500 for coordination of training. And Man Up, mentoring young men in our community that meets at the community center here, and engages a key youth group in our community. We thought $1,200 was worthwhile. We couldn't fund everything to the full extent, but we thought this would, was the amount that we recommended.
Based on their whole agenda of activities, we thought, well, the first 4 weeks would be with our guidance on that project.
Okay. Educare is a food pantry development project. I know they're going for some other funding, but it's quite a large need. We recommended $1,100. $800 would cover the freezer, and $300 would cover promotional materials. So that was the amount we recommended. $7,500 goes pretty quick. Okay. Let's see, where are we?
Tacoma Place.
Right, okay. Oh, yes, the playgroup. For some reason, I'm reading that and thinking drama. Tacoma Place. That's, a group that's been, working to organize play activities at different parks. And that'll help to cover, the outreach, the arts and crafts supplies and cover part of their funding. So we recommended $1,000.
I think they're the support of the booklet guide that they're presenting to the city parks. Seemed appropriate for the small community grant to support that effort, since it helps support use of the park system here.
Okay. And the Old Tacoma Business Association has another project for community art. Last year they did the bicycle. This year the theme is trees, and it's one that we think brought good visibility to the community. We thought a token amount, $500, would fund one sculpture, and they're getting funding elsewhere, and just that was what we recommended. You want to?
Sure. The Community Garden of Tacoma Overlook has a project out. They requested $1,187, and we thought that, again, partial funding of $500. This would help them get started with some of the hardware costs of their raised beds and hardware. They have an ambitious garden project, but the portion of 500 would help them with the hardware costs deemed appropriate. Seniors and those who care for them proposing a breakfast series of meetings to address quality of life issues, and based on their budget, 300 was recommended. That would cover, I think, first 3.
It was 2 out of the 3 meetings?
Meetings, and the food, the invitations, and so forth for that effort. And that brings us to $7,500.
Right. And there were 3 that, after due consideration... 4? Sorry. Splitting across.
Yeah. There were 4 that, while worthwhile, we felt that probably not directly appropriate either. So, and they're listed at the end, and we chose not to give them the limited funds.
Okay. Thank you. A couple questions from Councilmember Schultz.
I just wanted to ask that, I realize that $7,500 is a very small piece of pie to try to slice up. If there were more money available, and this is an unfair question, and I don't want to, you don't want to be put on the spot, just say so. But I get the impression that some of these, for example, like Man Up, were programs that had you had more money overall, that this would be one of them that you would have perhaps wanted to add more money to.
I think so.
Yes.
We kind of went back and forth amongst the 3 of us, with what was the number, and that for that particular one.
Was there other programs that kind of tickled your fancy in that regard?
I think, if there had been a bit more, we would have given us a token amount for the Tacoma Women's Business Network to help women entrepreneurs.
We thought maybe they might have some other resources available to them, and then, so given the small amount, but yeah, that might have been one that would have.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks to both of you and everyone else who helped you work through these numbers, and Jesse, I'm sure that you involved in that. Anyways, I thank you for the effort. I know this is a difficult task. It's like not a whole lot of money and a whole lot of ideas, and actually a whole lot of need on this list. And I certainly am not going to say that I disagree with your selections, but I would like to say there are a couple of things that I would like to see that the council considers allocating more money to. The Man Up program is one of them. I think based on what we've heard about that program from both the Recreation Department and from the community, that I would like to see the council add the additional money so that we can bring that to full funding of the $2,500. And then the other 2 programs that I think are important to the community, and I'd like to get your feedback on are the 2 community garden projects. I know that at the Montgomery Oaks Management Project, that the community does use those gardens there.
We did talk about that a good bit.
And then there's the other one at the Overlook.
Right.
I would like to see, $500 added to each of those, but I'd like to get your input on that.
Okay. Well, I mean, the one that we did recommend partial funding, the Overlook, It's a new project. It's on the periphery of the city. So it's, one where, we didn't, it's not like Maple Avenue where you're going by every day. Wanted to encourage or, provide some consideration for, that part of the city. With the Montgomery Oaks of Franklin Apartments, that only has 16 people that are using it. It did not show any matching funding from other places, and it's a continuing program. If you consider it as the effort that the gardeners are putting in, as street beautification, you could make a consideration that, there's some benefit there, that there's some matching volunteer hours, but the proposal did not show any of that. It did not document, what the costs were, why $500 was being
Right, that's what I was going to ask you.
$400 is what, $417 is what they had funded last year, so I wanted to...
But they didn't indicate how that money would be used?
Well,
no.
It's unclear, and there also seems to be some sort of rent or lottery system.
Lottery. It's renting those green troughs. Some people call them coffins, but the green troughs at $25 per from Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. And and heavily used by the people. They took in a summer of no rain. Those little teeny troughs grew a lot of stuff, and that was the one I was going to go after too.
That's $400 right there.
Yeah, that's $400 right there, right.
So I would encourage us to put the $400 there, and also to add an additional $500 to the Overlook program. And again, that would be not taken away from the 70. That would be in addition to the $7,500 that the committee is recommending. So that would be an additional $2,200.
The clerk or the manager had something to add on that?
I just wanted to add about the Montgomery Oaks project that the funding that they had used last year and had requested again this year is essentially to subsidize the planter rental for the low-income residents at Franklin Apartments, and that was that's mainly how the funding was used before, and is their request again.
Okay.
Thank you. And I think it cost, that was not the Overlook, that was the other, the Franklin.
I'm sorry, yes, at Franklin Apartments, right.
Thank you.
Right. And may I add one other thing?
Sure.
I just communicated with the Housing and Community Development Office today about I had this thought about the Tacoma Overlook project to see if it might be eligible for the New Ave Green Community Gardens project. So I'm going to explore that with them. So if that can be funded out of that money, then that would free up some of the other money for these other projects.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Snipper, followed by Councilmember Daniels-Cohen and Councilmember Wheel.
Thank you, Mayor. I really want to say thank you for your efforts also. It's always hard reading these proposals and then having to say, okay, yes on this one, no on that one. That's hard enough, the yes-no part, but then to have to go in and say, okay, so what if we, how much can we, that takes even more Solomon, King Solomon like, yes. That's okay, can we cut the baby and just feed? No.
Because you want to give enough support to keep the project going.
You don't want to kill the project with too little money, right? So on that basis, I support also adding the money to Man Up. This is youth are a very critical and key group in Tacoma Park. Whenever I talk to residents about what they would like to see more of, they always focus on more youth activities. And this project does have a proven track record. So I strongly encourage the council to add that money. And I'm getting persuaded by the community gardens discussion. Maybe we can come up with additional money for the community gardens, at least one of the two.
Councilmember Daniels-Cohen.
Yes, I underline, as best as possible, giving the Man Up program the full complement of dollars. I don't know, this is a program that was designed and created by 3 young men from Philadelphia that came down here to Washington, D.C. They have volunteered for at least 3 years every Tuesday night to work with the youth of Tacoma Park, and they're pretty incredible. One of them works on the Hill, and the rest of the other 2 work within the city as well, and I'm sure they've expanded a little bit, so they are really excellent mentors for the youth of our city. The other, you may wonder how I know so much about those coffins down there on Maple Avenue. I tried to rent them last year for the SS Carroll Neighborhood Association Recreation Department garden that Jacqueline is aware of because she helped dig it. And it seemed that the small community grants had snarfed them up. So I'm going, what? Who rented those puppies? And it was for the Franklin Apartments. I oversaw that. No one knew. I watched every day to see how they looked. They were well cared for. There was fruit, and well, when I say fruit, vegetables growing in. Norman came down probably every day and watered them when they were supposed to have been watered by the county, and I'm not sure that actually happened. I can't say enough about going ahead and giving them the full $500 because they planted at their own expense. I don't think any of the money went for the planting. It just went for renting the troughs. I'll call them troughs. Coffins is not such a sweet way to say it, but I'd also underline giving them the full amount of money. It keeps Norman, a busy man.
Carries a lot of buckets of water.
A lot of buckets of water. I don't think you all realize it didn't rain for probably almost 40 days last summer. I know that because we had a garden plot here and I hand watered it.
Maybe they need a rain barrel.
Yeah. They probably also do need a rain barrel. The Overlook Gardens is in Ward 3 also. Is it the one at Sligo?
Ward 6.
It's in Ward 6. It's not the one. It's not the plot in Ward 3. Okay. And that too, I mean, as many community gardens as we can make happen in this city for sustainable everything, it's wonderful that people are actually going out and planting and eating and cooking the food that they can grow.
Councilmember Mayo.
Thank you, Mayor, and also my apologies for being late to the meeting tonight. Thank you both for reviewing these grants. I really appreciate how much work that is. I have a general question first, which is, I wonder what you think about the value of us sort of doing a small set of grants that sort of cross the map versus focus. So when we were talking about the community garden thing, I thought, well, what if we had a year of the garden with a small grant program, and we literally spent $7,500 on garden plots? If something like that would create more momentum, more of a learning network, more movement, and it could be anything. It could be children, it could be seniors.
Well, having sat on this committee, one of the things, for a couple of rounds, one of the things I've noted is that the diversity of the grants has really increased. Julie's been on it since the beginning. And while it maybe isn't the largest pot of money to help, it does, I think having a bunch of grants that you can give some money to help them proceed with their project and increase their visibility and help various different things is I think very worthwhile. It puts out the city's name, I hope. And again, I can't stress that each of the recipients should in some small way acknowledge this small community grant program so that other people in the city become aware of its existence and the work that the city is doing on behalf of its members. Advertising and publicity is not necessarily to generate more grants, but just so that the city receives its acknowledgement. So concentrating funds on one big thing, I'm not sure.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean
A theme.
But on a theme. Lots of small grants, but on a theme.
Well, I don't know.
Well, think about it.
Think about it, yeah.
The other...
I mean, I think the potpourri works.
And it's interesting, I think it's more interesting when, there's some group getting off the ground and just wanting, a small bucket of money. I think the Tacoma Playgroup started a wing and a prayer. Yeah.
My next two questions, last two questions. I guess I'm wondering about the role for multiple year grants. So, I see the value of helping someone start, but then, when do we end? When is the appropriate time to, do we do a couple of years of grants and then, obviously it's all case by case, but.
Well, I think that was part of our conversation between Franklin Apartments and Tacoma Overlook. That was kind of the make or break feeling in our minds was, well, Franklin got it last year, that's a similar kind of project. So this year, the Overlook, which is off on New Hampshire Avenue and sort of in the far area, we'll give that to them. That was kind of our thinking now. Well, come up with something else that's great, that helps them both. That's nice. But that was kind of our our balancing act.
And then my last question or comment, I would really hope that we could put some money into the Women's Business Network grant in only two reasons. One, I think it's a promising effort, and I think they could do a lot with a small portion of the money that we put out there. Two, at the same time that we're proposing or thinking about giving $30,000, $20,000 to Old Tacoma Business Association, another $500 for the art project. I just think this is a group of entrepreneurs trying to get started, and the disparity between those levels of support are striking to me. So I'd really like to see them.
I think one of the questions in my mind was, where's OTBA's support of this effort? They were mentioned in the proposal, but not in any sort of concrete fashion. And it seems to me OTBA exists to help the business community, and they're an offshoot or a committee or some effort on their part to support this Women's Business Network would be fantastic. I'm not quite sure where the relationships lie, but I'm looking more to the business community to help with that, too.
Great. Thank you.
Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you. I haven't commented because I'm in general agreement with what the other council members have been saying about following your suggestions with the additions that they have put forward. On the Women's Business Network, my recollection is that when we discussed their proposal for a large grant, that we talked about, I think I used the word seed funding, that we wouldn't fund them to the level that they had applied for in a large grant. But I recall that I suggested $2,500, and I think a couple of the other council members said $1,000. So that is a different time period. That is FY13, while the small grants are the balance of this fiscal year, which ends June 30th. But we would put some money in there. And I do note that they are operating all the same, I assume, from funding by their members, the Women's Business Network, holding some meetings and so on, workshops that do look quite interesting.
Councilmember Daniels.
Yeah. Oh, and on the Franklin Apartments, I know from not from the city council or city budget point of view, but I was thinking of approaching or bringing up with the Ritchie Citizens Association, perhaps making a donation from, the funding there, so, it's, I do appreciate the, the activity and the gardens there. It's where I get my bus every morning.
Councilmember Daniels, did you have another comment?
Yes, I forgot to thank you all. In my spirit, what a great job you've done. $7,500 does not go very far, and you did actually stretch it across a wide range of groups. And I know that it could not have been easy, so thank you both.
Okay.
Councilmember Schultz.
I just would like to put in a vote for full funding of the Man Up program, because it addresses the population's segment that is perhaps our youth older adolescent young men that is at the highest risk of sort of going off the path, so to speak. And the fact that we have this program here, being these fellows coming in to mentor, and they made a presentation here a couple of years ago, and it was very inspiring, the work that they're doing. A number of those young men come from the New Hampshire Towers area over in Ward 6, which the police chief has told us on a previous occasion is one of the hot spots in the city for gang activity. So for every down to the last dollar, I think this would be the best way to put a dollar, to spend a dollar if we're going to add money to anything. And I would want us to be able to do that to the extent that we have the money to do so.
And I recall you having very strong opinions when we had the large grant discussion about the Tacoma Women's Business Network. Did you have any other comments on that, on the small?
I had suggested that probably we could give them, this was in regard to the large grants, and with the time we were aware that they had applied for a small grant, maybe $1,000 to kind of help them with getting their website set up and the printing costs for flyers and membership forms and all that, which is, real costs. But one of the things I pointed out in that discussion at considerable length was that there's an enormous amount of existing resources in the larger community, not in Tacoma Park per se, but quite nearby and also all around the D.C. metropolitan area that can provide an abundant level of services and workshops and programs that are already existing that women or any subgroup can tap into, including a national organization of women entrepreneurs that does this kind of workshop all across the city. So I don't begrudge them, not getting any money at all, but I think that that's a case where there are lots of resources available to women entrepreneurs. And so in a sense of priority, as an at-risk group of youth, that seems to me to be a much greater need to encourage this mentoring program.
Thank you all very much for your work and your recommendations. It sounds like the council wants to find a way to increase the $7,500 small grant award process and add $1,300 to Man Up, $1,000 to the Tacoma Women's Business Network, and $500 to each of the two community gardens projects at the Franklin and at the Overlook. My assumption is that these funds would come out of unappropriated reserves? Oh, and there was also looking at the possibility of the other source of funding for the one.
What I would suggest is if there is a consensus on the council this evening, you go ahead and provide that direction, because it was our intention, I think, to bring this back next week in a resolution to formalize the council's intent to award funding.
Right.
The other thing I would say is at the break, I can go check my notes upstairs, because since you're getting ready to do a budget amendment, what I would suggest is you transfer money from the general contingency account to the appropriate line item in the budget, and you just amend the budget amendment that's before you right after the break.
I would like to make a motion that we do as she just said.
Second. All those in favor of going that route? Okay. So that's how we'll proceed. Thanks very much.
All right. You're welcome.
And we will
It's our pleasure.
take a short break, and we will come back, and we will, at that point, have one of the items being an amended budget amendment. traffic restriction petition area. Do you want to say something?
Sure. In your package, I have the revised map as requested by members of council that show a larger area of streets that would be affected, that would be included in a petition area that you would want to recommend to the Montgomery County hearing examiner at the public hearing on Wednesday, March 7th at 7 p.m. in the auditorium on the lobby level of the Executive Office Building in Rockville. And the resolution, which has been amended from last week, the draft that has been amended, that includes the streets that are in that larger area. And the additional item was the minor technical correction to Resolution 2010-34. And we discussed that very briefly last week. We went ahead and put forward a resolution correcting 2010-34. Let's see, the only other thing I can note is you may have a copy that Giuseppe Semino had submitted comments. Those are the only comments that I saw for tonight's meeting.
Okay. Would somebody like to introduce the resolution?
Yes, I'd like to introduce it.
Is there a second?
Move it. Second.
Introduced by Councilmember Snipper, second by Councilmember Siemens. It came out Snicker.
I know. It's better than some of the alternatives.
Yes. We can go there. We'll do a rotating.
Don't mess around with my
mispronunciation.
Yeah. Any comments on the resolution? Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the effort you put in to incorporate our comments. I think it's a very clever way to do it, and I appreciate it. I certainly do hope that our county will go along with our slightly expanded petition area, because this is these additional streets in particular will both have cut-through traffic that's diverted from the restricted area, as well as folks who want to go through the restricted area. They'll have a lot longer. So they should be, I believe, they should be included in the petition area. So I urge my fellow council members to vote for the resolution. Thank you.
Other comments from council members? Councilmember Schultz.
I was not here at the last meeting of the city council on the 20th or the 21st. But so for the record, I just wanted it to be said or known that I did listen to the session on the last week's session and carefully to that and heard the debate, and that generally I am in agreement with the expanded plan for the petition area for the reasons that were pointed out by Councilmember Snipper at last week's meeting. And if you think about it just very quickly, you look at the larger map where you see that Park Valley Road really acts as a connector street connecting Sligo Avenue, which of course we all know runs all the way straight across to Fenton Street and over to Georgia Avenue. And so for better or for worse, Park Valley then connects that traffic flow directly into Sligo Creek Road, into the streets and community neighborhoods beyond. And while it wasn't probably never in anybody's dreams intended to be a connector street, and it certainly is not designed as one in terms of its capacity, its width, and all of that, it's a very unfortunate situation. But last week, Councilmember Mayle made the point, which I felt was very valid, that stopping traffic from using certain streets at certain times of the day or at all in certain directions is when you do that in a large area like is tentatively has been proposed, you really start to strangle the whole traffic system in a much larger area. I think the solutions do lie more in the realm of traffic calming. Unfortunately, this is not in the city of Tacoma Park, so we really can't do that. We don't have the power to do that, but we do have the ability to expand this survey area so that those people who truly are all affected have a chance to participate in the petition, for better or for worse. Who knows what the outcome will be. So that's why I think that this is something that I can support.
And I'll just reiterate very briefly my comments from last week. I wish that the county had a different process that they could use. I wish that our understanding of the better way to go with traffic calming rather than traffic restrictions would be a much better way for the county to go in this instance. But I feel that given where the county is in this process, that they're at the end of a very long, multi-year process, and that particular neighborhood is kind of boxed into a certain way of dealing with this problem, and having the conclusion to that whole process with only limited options, and the fact that the county process also includes counting a household that's in the area that isn't engaged in this issue and doesn't vote as a no vote. The large expansion of the area that we're proposing will necessarily doom that neighborhood's attempt to address their issues. And so I think the proposal put forth by the Deputy City Manager originally last week was a much more defensible expansion, given the process that we have to deal with and the fact that it's not our process. And so I prefer that one, so I will be voting no. But I am in support of a better process and a way of dealing with not restrictions, but calming. Any public comment on this resolution? Okay, seeing none, we'll vote on this. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. And that carries 6-1. We will move on to...
Could I just ask, for this resolution, the public hearing is on next Wednesday evening. Is there somebody who would want to make the presentation?
I can go.
Okay.
Good, because I was
Thank
going to say I'm not the one to do it.
Right.
Okay, so Councilmember Snipper will do that.
Okay, good, thank you.
We'll now take up the resolution amending Resolution 2010-34, which is the clarifying resolution that the Deputy City Manager described. Would somebody like to move that?
Move.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Snipper, seconded by Councilmember Grimes. Comments? Okay, this is the one that fixes the...
Right, this one sign shouldn't have been included in the list of things to be removed after the traffic calming measures are installed.
Okay. Any public comment on this resolution? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Moving along to Agenda Item 5, which is the legislative update and resolution supporting Senate Bill 807, entitled Income Tax Subtraction Modification Land Acquisition for Unit of State Government. If the Deputy City Manager would like to give us a brief description of this item.
Okay, yes, I've got an overview of legislative items, and I have this one. I'll go ahead and talk about it first. Senator Madaleno's office had contacted us, I guess first through the mayor's office, urging us to support Senate Bill 807, House Bill 1155. And basically, this I think, started out of the BRAC process and some of the issues in Senator Madalenos' area, where in looking through the state laws, if a property is taken by condemnation for a public purpose by the state, the money that they get for their property is exempt from the Maryland income tax for that year. But if only a partial taken is done, if you keep some property and the state takes some property, the money that you get for the portion that's taken is subject to Maryland income tax. And so that seemed like, well, here the state's giving you some money, and then it's taking back, a set percentage for the taxes, and that didn't seem fair. As this particular area dealt with it with the BRAC improvements, it started to realize that it would also apply to many of the partial takings that are possible under the Purple Line development, Red Line in Baltimore, and that kind of thing. And the first initiative of this bill, and the way it's currently titled, if you look on the record, is that it has to do with transportation projects. They realized, well, doesn't have to be limited to transportation projects. There could be partial takings for a park or some other purpose, and that all of those should have the same process. So an amendment is being submitted that changes this from just dealing with transportation projects to any state initiative that would involve a partial taking. I tried to figure out what kind of monetary impact this might have on the city of Tacoma Park. I would say it was difficult to imagine because everybody, of course, is taxed differently, and you never know exactly how this works. So I did include in the cover letter kind of an example of how this might be affected. However, if we're looking at the Purple Line takings, it's not likely that the owners of the lands that would be affected actually call Tacoma Park their home so that it would have that direct impact on Tacoma Park. What it does, though, is provide some help to these business owners or other property owners that are Tacoma Park property owners who would be contributing to the larger good by having a transit system for the community come by their property. The offset of any tax loss that we might face as a city may be offset by the increased property value in the surrounding community by having these services. That's pretty, it's conjecture. And so I was kind of at a loss of coming up with any actual fiscal impact of this legislation. I think it's primarily seen as a fairness issue. The entire District 21 delegation, District 20 delegation has supported this, and so Senator Madalenos' office wanted to make sure that Tacoma Park is on board with it. They'd like to have testimony, if you're in favor of this, for a hearing on Wednesday. I can answer any questions you might have.
Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you. Noting that the likely impact of this bill on the city of Tacoma Park is slight, I'd like to propose a change in the wording of the resolution. I would delete the 9 whereas clauses, and I'd replace them with, whereas the city of Tacoma Park recognizes the good works of Senator Richard S. Madaleno, Jr., and wishes to respond in a positive manner to his request for SB 807 support. Just put that whereas in there in place of the ones that are here already. I guess that's not widely supported, is it? So, in seriousness, I note that we have a reminder once again that the municipal share of locally designated state income taxes is capped by state law at 17%. You can see that in the center of the fiscal impact section. I would like to see the city of Tacoma Park work with the friendly members of the Maryland State Legislature to see if we can't raise that cap on locally designated state income taxes that goes to municipalities. So that is a separate issue from this resolution, but it's one that I would like to see us take up at an appropriate opportunity. Thank you.
Councilmember Mayo.
This is just a general question. Why do we put forth resolutions on some bills but not others. For example, why would we not have a show of hands of support for something like this, but not actually put it into a whereas resolution?
Well, that's a good question. Generally, we've just kind of had a practice that if it's a position that doesn't seem to have been taken in the past, and you want to be on record that it's done via a resolution. To me, although we could make an argument that Tacoma Park is in favor of these kinds of projects and in fairness and for our business community, because it did have an economic impact on Tacoma Park, I didn't feel comfortable just saying, sure, we support it. I did want to bring it for your consideration, where I'm not sure I could argue if it needs to be in a resolution or not.
Thanks.
But I might add that having it in a resolution makes it something that the deputy city manager or her successor at some point in the future can go back to, and makes it possible to compile that list that we have, that these are the positions. If it's a show of hands, it's in the minutes, probably somebody won't find it a couple of years from now.
Well, that's a different problem altogether, but yes.
Anybody else? Okay. Why don't we... Did you have something else? Okay, I didn't think so. Why don't we vote on that one, and then we'll do the legislative update.
Sounds fine.
Any public comment on this resolution? Seeing none, all those did we move it?
No.
Did we move it?
You just did.
Okay, you just did, okay.
I'll second.
Sure, why not? Moved by Councilmember Rayl, second by Councilmember Schultz. We have another second over here.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you get that one.
I'm not that proud.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, legislative update.
Okay. Well, in my free time, I've been sending out position statements. It's been kind of a little bit of a tough rush right now. And today we started the process of sending out the kind of our arguments for money for economic development in Tacoma Park. Starting tomorrow, the Senate Budget and Taxation Committee starts hearing the DHCD, state DHCD budget, which includes funding for the Community Legacy and Neighborhood Business Works programs, which we've used very successfully for a number of years. They've added a Strategic Demolition and Smart Growth Impact Fund to their proposal, which would allow us to help demolish properties or combine properties as part of a revitalization project if we so needed. So we sent in our statement to the Senate, which does not allow public testimony. They just take letters. Next week, they will have the House budget discussions, and that's where there will be a presentation. Sarah Schopp is putting together a whole nice package of information with visuals and that kind of thing that we'd like to make a good full-court press on. That is next Wednesday at 4 o'clock. We're still not exactly sure the right people to be there for that, so we may call you. We're trying to figure out what would make a good and effective delivery of our information. In addition, we're sending this information out to other delegates and senators as it's associated with other kinds of bills and budgets, to make it clear that for many reasons we like these monies. We want to see the New Hampshire Avenue development and some of the other revitalization efforts that we could use funds for. I wanted to let you know that the city's alcoholic beverage bill was heard today and had no problems were raised, so we're assuming things are going along with that.
And we assume no problems will be raised when it gets to the next step?
That's right. My understanding is at this point it's really a boring bill from legislators' points of view.
At what point did it get held up last year?
This point.
Next step.
This point, so we're past.
Yeah, this was, the Alcoholic Beverage Subcommittee was where it got held up last year, and it's no problem this year. Later this week, both Councilmember Mayle and Councilmember Grime have been asked to come and testify on Friday, so you might run into each other. I'm kind of trying to coordinate with Michelle Douglas to make sure that if you need anything, we get that provided. Councilmember Mail's been asked to testify on a stormwater watershed protection bill that Senator Raskin and Tom Hucker have been putting forth. We are trying to get a statement for the Senate bill, which will be heard tomorrow, and some testimony for Friday. Councilmember Grimes will be testifying on removing the personal property tax exemption for banks and financial institutions, similar to as you did last year. Is that right?
Yeah. So I have a question regarding that, if you're ready.
Please.
So I discussed with Mayor Williams prior to the council meeting. It appears, although I am not certain, that this bill is substantially the same as House Bill 1048 of last legislative season, which the City Council endorsed. So my question is whether I have the City Council's authorization this year, this Friday, to testify on behalf of the city, or do I not? It's up to the council to determine that. I'll go either way.
I think it's
My
straightforward,
sense
sure.
is it's a follow-on from last year.
Yeah. All right, very good.
So you'd be testifying on behalf of the council?
Yeah, much better if you can go there testifying on behalf of the city, rather than saying, well, gee, I'm on the city council, but I'm only here as an individual.
Yes, of course. Right, all right, well, I will dredge up my testimony from last year and make any modifications that it seems to need, and then plan to send it out to everyone who's on the podium right now for review.
Thank you. Let's see. On Wednesday of this week, we have the next MML Legislative Committee, Governor O'Malley, and is Beverly Swain Staley really going to be there?
And also Senate President Miller.
Okay.
What's the time again, Saturday?
On this Wednesday.
This Wednesday.
Yeah. And so that should be an interesting meeting. And next week, as I mentioned, we have the budget hearing on the DHCD, community legacy and related funds. But also next week on Friday, there's a couple items. There's one of the bills that is to try to refine the money for spending of HUR money so that municipalities get more. There's also the Senate side hearing on the Telecommunications Committee, which is something we may want to bring up at next council meeting, maybe to take a position on. I think we've done in the past. But Delegate Hickson, just about every year, comes up with a committee task force effort to change how telecommunication fees are done, and often it can jeopardize the way that we get funding for our city TV franchises and franchise fee payments and that kind of thing. This telecommunications committee that was proposed this year to discuss how this all works didn't even have any municipal representatives as identified as something who should be on the committee. MML has taken a position saying their support of this idea of having this committee, but it needs to have municipal representatives. Many of the municipalities that do have the cable TV franchises actually oppose this committee, just oppose it outright. I'm not sure the correct tack for this city to take on that. I need to look at that more closely and bring that before you to get some direction as to how we proceed.
And just for your information, I've discussed this at some length with MML staff, and their feeling is that the main part of the bill that's getting at how the things might change before they get to the committee is that it doesn't really affect municipalities, but that the committee, if they're going to do that, the task force, which would be, I think, get back in a short period of time, like 6 months, is something that we definitely need a seat at the table.
Okay. I think that the fear is that by opening the box, the discussion really comes into play about how much money we get for use of our right-of-ways for telecommunications facilities and for these franchise fees. And so there's lots of nervousness about that. It's one of the few places municipalities get money. I think still the biggest fight is at the national level, where we are still want to make sure that we don't just get money primarily for capital funding, but that we actually could spend the money on our staff who operate the city TV, or just even have some money go into the general fund. That's a whole different discussion, but we'd hate to lose it at this level in the state of Maryland. So I think that's my quick overview.
Any questions?
Okay, I'll be communicating with a number of you on testimony and coordination. Yes?
Next Wednesday. Not the 29th, but I think it's the 7th?
Correct.
That's the 4 to 6 meeting?
That's right.
And say what that is again.
That is a budget hearing for the State Department of Housing and Community Development, and it's traditionally been a place where fairly strong cases have been made about how what's really a fairly small amount of money from the state makes just tremendous differences in the municipalities for the kinds of streetscape improvements, facade improvements, some money that help businesses kind of get on their feet and move forward. And we've made very good use of those funds.
Councilmember Schultz.
Susie, you had mentioned several weeks ago that the pending governor's budget was pointing in the direction of increasing the grants from the state of Maryland towards community legacy from about $4 million to about $16 million.
It's quite a large increase.
Yeah,
Yes.
it really is. So is that still the case?
Yes, that's the proposal. That's the proposal from the governor's office, and we're there to say yes, please.
Okay, good.
Please
to know.
support that request.
Any other questions? Okay,
Thanks very much.
At this point, we will move to Agenda Item 6, which is a second reading ordinance authorizing the FY12 Budget Amendment Number 2, and the city manager has provided us with some additional information for the amendment.
Yes, what I went up and did at the break was to incorporate the additional funding you all decided on for the Small Community Grant Program, which is noted just sort of at the end of the cover sheet. There were a couple other items, though, in the ordinance that changed since first reading, so I did just want to point those out. On page 2, there were a couple whereas clauses that we had inadvertently not included the first go-around, just to make sure that, if someone is looking at the ordinance without the benefit of a cover sheet, they know what those are about. And then you'll note on page 3 at the top, there was a whereas clause added with regard to the Small Community Grant Program funding. On page 5, you'll see item number 38 under the general fund transfers. This would effectuate the transfer from the general contingency account to the grants account line item for the additional $3,300. And then also further down on page 5, there was with pages 5 and 6, when we were reviewing this again on second reading, I had picked up the wrong figure. Yolanda had noted that on the special revenue fund for the gang grant. So there's just a change in the figure. And so those were the changes since first reading.
Okay. Would somebody like to move this?
Move.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Council discussion or questions? Public comment? Any public comment on this? Okay, this is a second reading ordinance that requires a roll call vote. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
Aye.
Councilmember Daniels Cullors.
Yes.
Councilmember Grimes.
Aye.
Councilmember Mayo.
Aye.
Councilmember Schultz.
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Sniffer.
Aye.
Okay. We now need a motion to convene as the Stormwater Management Board.
Move.
Moved by Councilmember Grimes, second by Councilmember Snipper. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We're now in session as the Stormwater Management Board. We'll take up agenda item number 7, which is the second reading ordinance authorizing the FY12 Stormwater Budget Amendment Number 1.
Nothing has changed since
No
first
changes?
reading.
Okay.
so move it again.
Okay. It's been moved by Councilmember Snipper. He's in a moving mood this evening.
Okay, apparently.
Second.
Second by Councilmember Daniels Cohen. Any comments on this one, Councilmember Schultz?
Does this basically mean that this particular project is just simply not going to be done, or is it just going to be deferred until a future fiscal year?
It will not be done this year, and I think it will just be a matter of when funding would become available.
Okay. Any other council comments? Any public comment? This is a second reading ordinance. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
Aye.
Councilmember Daniels Cohen.
Aye.
Councilmember Grimes.
Yes.
Councilmember Mail.
Aye.
Councilmember Schultz.
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Sniffer.
Aye.
Next item is the consent agenda. There are 4 items on the consent agenda. Single reading ordinance awarding a contract for stormwater cleaning system and TV inspection. There are 2 of those, actually, to 2 different companies. A resolution providing for an appointment to the Arts and Humanities Commission, and a resolution providing for an appointment to the Board of Elections. Somebody like to move the consent agenda?
Move.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Snipper, seconded by Councilmember Schultz. All those in favor of the consent agenda, please say aye. Oh, no, sorry, it's a roll call. We have single reading ordinances. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
Aye.
Councilmember Daniels Cohen.
Aye.
Councilmember Grimes.
Aye.
Councilmember Mail.
Aye.
Councilmember Schultz.
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Sniffer.
Aye.
Okay. That finishes our voting session for the evening. We'll now move into work session. And we have one item, which is a continued discussion of financial matters and budget priorities. And before we start that, let me just add one quick comment, which is that Councilmember Mail talked to me end of last week about the idea of maybe having a more kind of a more general discussion about broader budget priorities and how the council views going forward and things. And after we talked, I thought, well, gee, it might be good to have a little time to talk about the strategic plan, since that is tied to the budget, and that is a way that we can have some of those broader discussions and revisit some of the things that the council has set up going forward. So if people are interested, we could schedule a kind of an update discussion on the strategic plan relatively soon that would help guide us in the budget. The city manager said that as far as what she needs, I'll let you say it for yourself.
What I had said to the mayor is we are actually, all the data entry by the staff is actually due by the close of business tomorrow, and I will spend most of next week going through budget request. Just from a timing standpoint, there will probably not be much of an opportunity for your discussion on the strategic plan to influence kind of what is going into my recommended budget, just simply from a matter of timing. But I do think having the council have the opportunity to discuss priorities may be helpful as you go into the budget process, receive my recommended budget, and as you sort of work through that process. So I think go ahead and have the discussion, but I just sort of want to be clear.
You're not going to pay attention for now.
I'll pay attention. I'm just not sure how much, depending on when the discussion takes place, I'll be able to kind of switch gears in the middle of developing my budget.
So wanting to have make sure that there's a realistic sense if that's something people want to do. Councilmember Grimes?
My assumption as a new council member would be that the first fiscal year budget that I'm involved in enacting would largely be set based on priorities of the prior council. But I do very much like Councilmember Mail's suggestion of, you could call it brainstorming, you could call it a discussion of the strategic priorities that each of us have and that we have collectively. I'll just remark that sometimes those priorities don't necessarily involve money so much as they involve attention and emphasis. And we do all recognize that we live in an area with multiple jurisdictions that deliver different types of services, so that some of the services, including ones that we discussed tonight, healthcare in particular, are often the jurisdiction of agencies other than ourselves, so that we're not necessarily spending money so much as we're spending attention and time, including community members' attention and time. Food services are another type of area that we're not necessarily going to spend much of our own money in that case, a lot of the delivery mechanisms are going to relate to community organizations and then to the public schools. So I would add that as something that is not necessarily, these things are not necessarily money-related, but they're important for the City Council to discuss at the appropriate time, in my opinion. Thank you.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I just also want to voice support and appreciation to Councilmember Mayo for his suggestion. I think it's important for us, we get sometimes, we focus on what's in front of us every week and don't take the time to sit back and think about, are we really even talking about the right things? Maybe we should be envisioning what we want for the city and where we want to be 5 years from now, and talking about how we're going to get there. We have to continue with the week-to-week activities, but maybe we can spend some time on, looking at the bigger picture.
And I'll just look for a quick nod from the city manager and the city clerk, who can acknowledge that for about a month there, every week in the agenda meeting, I would say, what about the strategic plan? And
That
so
would be
it was a question of kind of how to fit it in, and it was helpful to have a push to remind me to make that happen.
We certainly weren't disparaging you. Or
No, I wasn't feeling that. It was just like, gee, we've been talking about this for a while.
Right.
So, with that said, we will try and schedule that as soon as possible, and now we can concentrate on the follow-up on the previous discussion that we had.
What I tried to do in the cover sheet, working with Yolanda, is kind of outline some of the issues that were carryover from the prior discussion. So certainly what is in the cover sheet is not necessarily, you're not limited to the items here. We were just trying to wrap up a few things that you all had talked about back on January 30th. Some of the information in the packet was responsive to requests made by council members for certain information or information presented in a certain way. I'll just kind of briefly walk through those just to see if there were any questions. One of the first items was the general fund summary, which outlines actual revenues and expenditures going back historically. We had provided some information in the January 30th packet. It was Councilmember Mayo, I believe, who had asked if we could go back a few more years. So we went back to fiscal year 2003. We had changed financial systems around that time, so that was the information that was kind of readily available off of the system. So I don't know if there's any questions about anything that's contained on this sheet. The one thing I would just note, just sort of some accounting ease, if you will, I think the council is aware that we do have an equipment replacement reserve. From a practical standpoint, what happens is items that are paid for out of the equipment replacement reserve are accounted for in the capital outlay line. On the general fund summary, you don't really see an offsetting revenue. So certainly there is some going into fund balance in FY12 or was planned for the Public Works facility, but you'll always see the expenditures recorded in the budget for anything being paid for out of any of those reserve funds, but you don't see an offsetting revenue. That's just handled kind of below the line in terms of a shift in fund balance. The other thing that you will not see on here is any kind of contribution to those reserve funds. Once again, that's sort of an allocation from unreserved to reserve fund balance. So for FY12, for example, the council had agreed to allocate $1 million to reserve funds. And then the last comment I would just make on this is at the end of the year fund balance, that is a mixture of both reserved and unreserved fund balance with those line items. So I don't know if there's any questions about the information here, but...
No, I just thank you for putting it together. It's really helpful background, and it really is just contextual for me.
Okay. The next couple pages were also responsive to a request made by Councilmember Mayo on January 30th, which had to do with debt service, payment on bond obligations, capital leases, things of that nature. The first couple pages, pages 85, or the number 85, 91, and 92, were taken from the comprehensive annual financial report for fiscal year 11. And so that just shows that information in a number of different ways. The following sheet, which is not numbered, was a spreadsheet that Yolanda had actually put together. We will be paying off, as you may recall, the initial community center bond issue that was taken out in 2002. We'll be doing an early redemption of that later this year. We will also be paying off the street improvement bonds that were taken out in 2004, and we also have a police equipment capital lease that is being paid off in fiscal year 12. So the purpose of this schedule is just simply to show you kind of where we will actually be as of June 30th of 2012, because there will be a significant reduction made in the city's bonded indebtedness by the end of this fiscal year.
Councilmember Snipper, did you have a question in this section?
Thank you. This was very helpful. I do wonder, on the 85, 86, and 87, I think. No, sorry. They all have different numbers. Tables 4, 10, 11. So there are various percentages here. Debt service as a percentage of non-capital expenditures, ratio of net bonded debt to assessed value, and so on. Are there established guidelines for cities of our size for these various percentages?
There is really not one set standard from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Yolanda may have to help me with the time frame, but there is now a requirement in Maryland, I believe, for local governments to have a debt policy, and that was passed by the council. Do you remember when? It was several years ago?
Yeah, like 2-3 years ago.
2 or 3 years ago. Right, so that was sort of a local standard. I can send a copy of that out to the council tomorrow, if you'd like. But there's not one uniform standard. I think there's just so many differences in the way municipalities are funded, and there actually are some states that actually have caps on how much debt you can take out. I previously worked in a state that had actual legal restrictions in terms of how much debt you could issue.
Thank you. And a follow-up is that, of course, what you, to me anyway, what you incur debt on, a reason for taking out debt is an extremely important part of whether, how much debt you have. If the debt, as we did when we did the street repairs, is going to end up saving us a lot of money, then, that's sort of a twofer. And in the case of the Public Works facility, we needed to do that pretty soon. And so taking out a bond instead of trying to come up with all the money, saving the money ourselves, putting it aside to do it, makes a lot of sense, because there were several parts of that facility that I thought would fall down.
They actually were falling down.
Yeah, actually there were parts that were falling down. So sometimes it's not just the amount of the debt or the ratio, but what it's being used for that matters a lot. And of course, the irony now, you're talking about paying down the debt. The irony now is if we were to take out debt now, the interest rate's considerably lower.
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, it makes sense to pay off the higher interest rate bonds, and if necessary, take out bonds for a current much lower rate, if that turned out to be useful.
You can do that. I think one of the things you just have to weigh is the debt issuance cost, because there certainly are some cost involved with legal fees, drawing up bond documents and things of that nature.
And I'll just add real quick that it was interesting for me to hear what a fellow municipality in Montgomery County debt policy is. I know.
Referring to Gaithersburg?
Well, I was thinking of Rockville, but also contrast that with Gaithersburg. Gaithersburg doesn't do debt. They never do debt. They don't have any. They haven't had any. And on the other hand, Rockville has a policy that in looking for how they're going to fund projects, that their indebtedness will never be more than 15% of their budget amount. So very different policies, each of them operating in pretty parallel tracks in terms of how they do stuff. Councilmember Mayo.
A question, just so I understand this. I'm looking at the numbers on page 91, bonded debt, 2011, $6,147,000. So that's the total amount of debt that we had at the end of 2011, is that right?
Not to answer a question with a question, but I think it depends how you define debt. The 6.14 figure that you just mentioned is going to be general obligation bonds. Things such as capital leases or notes are also considered to be debt.
Okay. And then the table 2-3 pages later on, after page 92, the schedule of long-term debt projected balance. That shows a total projected balance at June 30th of $4.4 million. So that would be roughly, compared to the $6 million figure later on, that's approximately how much you expect it to be paid down over the course of this fiscal year?
Yes, I think the notes payable, $150,000, I don't think we carried over, Yvonne, to the schedule of long-term debt, but that would still be payable as of June 30th, correct? The capital lease would be paid off.
The notes payable for 150 is included.
If that is included, okay. Yes, in answer to your question, Councilmember, I apologize. That would be correct.
Okay. And so it looks like, and this, I'll get to my comment, that we will, at the end of this year, be back to a debt level that is similar to what we last had in 2004. So we're going back to a level of indebtedness that's similar to, roughly 9 years ago. My comment is that in the next fiscal year, not necessarily the budget we're working on now, but the 2014 budget, I think it would be really helpful to have as data some of the context that Mayor Williams was just talking about, that some local other municipalities nearby, or frankly other municipalities that we just think are in some way comparable to us around these figures of debt, and also, for example, issues like the general fund balance carryover from year to year. For me, at least, as a new council member, just having more sense for the context in which we could place ourselves would be really helpful. I'm assuming that would also be very helpful for residents, for whom looking at these tables, unless you have a background in it, it's numbers. It's just a bunch of numbers.
Just so I'm clear, Councilmember Mayo, the data that you're interested in would be sort of the percentage of assessed value or the per capita, those type of figures. Those are actually the majority of the cities that I would consider comparable to us probably also do comprehensive annual financial reports, and that type of data is part of the requirements of issuing the report. So we could just pick a couple select cities and just look at their charts from FY11.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think the city does a very good job. The council and the staff do a very good job of putting together a budget that seems to me quite sound. And so we should tell people that story. And so one way to tell people that story is to provide some more contextual information so people can get a sense for how what we're doing relates to other places that they might know.
I think this information will be readily available. I do look at some people's CAFRs, but not all that often. But someone like Rockville, for example, has a water utility. I believe they would probably break that out separately in their financial information because those are typically issued as revenue bonds and payable by the ratepayers. But we'll see what we can pull together for you.
And as I said, it does, a year and a half from now.
Sure.
Doesn't have to be soon. Thank you.
Councilmember Schultz.
I guess I'd just like to observe that you have a case of Gaithersburg which decides as a policy not to have any debt. Rockville has a different policy, but I also think that sometimes not having a policy makes sense, because when you create bond indebtedness, you're doing it to finance a long-term asset over a period of a long term. And when, for example, a Department of Public Works facility is determined to be dilapidated, you have to replace it. You hope that you can do it at a time when interest rates are advantageous, like they have been in the last 3 or 4 years. But so it becomes a function of what you need the money for. I mean, one of the advantages of paying off bonds is that you can, as you mentioned, reduce, get rid of high interest rate debt and replace it, or just pay it off, or maybe replace it with low interest debt. But the another advantage, of course, is that if you do reduce your debt obligations, then you are giving yourself sort of cap room, like think of a sports team where you've got more borrowing capacity, because we might decide that the condition of streets in the city, for example, are such that we really have to start spending a whole lot more than we've been spending in order to get our streets repaired. And I'm just using that as an example. So, I mean, I guess it's a nice thing to sort of say, oh, well, we have a policy of only doing it in a certain way, but I think realistically, long-term borrowing is part of a whole long-term financial strategic plan to maintain our capital improvements around the city at as high a level as possible, whether it be this building or the Public Works building, the library, the rec center on the other side of town, or our streets and the bridges that we own that aren't owned by the state, and that sort of thing. And when those things need to be replaced, you hope to be able to time them in a way where you have the debt capacity and you have the interest rate advantage. And so it's a little bit of, there's a lot of strategy involved in it, and there just isn't always going to match up to some sort of stated policy that you're going to adhere to year after year after year. So that's all I wanted to add.
And it's also good to remember that the use of debt spreads out the cost for the facility or the project over a longer period of time. Therefore, the people who are using it over the longer period of time are actually paying for it, rather than cost shifting on to the people who are in town at the particular moment when you make the expenditure.
Absolutely. That's one of the most critical aspects of it.
Councilmember Siemens.
We often talk about debt and what's the proper level of debt. I think it's also fair to talk about reserves and what's the proper level of reserves, because reserves could help to smooth out the ups and downs in the economy, too. So I think that's an important part of our discussion that we should include.
And then we'll go back to the city manager who's going, oh, but I have more things to go over.
Just a couple items I wanted to follow up with from previous meetings, and one had to do with the discussion on January 30th concerning the city newsletter. I know Councilmember Siemens had expressed some interest in my including funding in the budget to modify the format of the newsletter. And Councilmember Siemens, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but I think you had wanted maybe some redesign to make it look more like the traditional municipal newsletter instead of maybe trying to look like a actual newsletter. There really wasn't much council discussion of that idea, so I wanted to try to get a sense of kind of what the majority of the council wishes to do, and if there are some desired changes, it would be helpful to the degree the council could provide it a little bit more detail, so if I do need to get some pricing, I have an idea of what I'm pricing more specifically. So I'm really just looking for some direction from the council.
Councilmember Siemens, do you want to say a few?
Yes, I think you've stated it very accurately in what I was talking about. For the one piece, the other piece that I mentioned was that given the current economic situation and after having discussions with numerous businessmen across the city, I know that our small businesses are still struggling in this economy. And an idea that I put on the table was that we would investigate including some advertising for our small businesses without expense to the businesses themselves within our city newsletter, because it is widely read and distributed throughout the city. I didn't really finalize that into any kind of a proposal. I could see us doing it two different ways, and other council members may have another idea. One way would be, individual ads for our small businesses, maybe since we couldn't have a 50-page newsletter, so we could draw names out of the hat, or however we would pick which ones got in at any point in time, or that we would have combined ad that would focus on a particular business segment at any one month, something like that. Like I say, I haven't put this together into a firm proposal at this point, but I think it would be a real benefit to the business people and to the community as a way of helping to spur the economy in Tacoma Park.
Councilmember Snipper.
I think this is a really intriguing idea, and it kind of complements the, I'll call it the business directory that is put out by volunteers. And having it in the city newsletter gives it a different kind of visibility. I do think if we were to go forward with something like that, we would want to design it so that it used, since we aren't getting any revenue from it, that it used a very minimal amount of staff time. So if there were some way to do it that didn't require a lot of, staff time, for example, if it were done alphabetically or if it were done geographically or something fairly straightforward, I think that would make more sense.
I didn't mean to eliminate the discussion of the reformatting, because I think there are two distinctly different proposals that I put on the table, and so I do encourage us to change our newsletter. I think it doesn't look like a newsletter. I think people will read it as a newspaper, and I think it also would get more attention, more appropriate attention, if we were to make it more like a municipal newsletter.
Yeah, let's stay focused on what direction we need to provide the city manager so she can come up with some pricing or alternatives in the proposed budget, right? That's what you're looking for. Councilmember Romeo.
With regard to the first question of formatting, I guess I would say that I'd lean more towards supporting there being money available for the city newsletter to do a survey of residents to find out what residents would be more likely to read. At least for me, I don't necessarily know what that would be, although I think the idea Councilmember Siemens talked about is intriguing. I'd want to, and you can do that through a free Survey Monkey. It's just the staff time to put the questions together. With regard to the second question of the free advertising, I don't know that I have a strong opinion on it, but I guess one way to potentially sieve the people who might want to take advantage of that space is to say that the city would provide space in so long as the entity asking for it would provide a coupon that goes with it, $1 off, something like that, which would make it, might somewhat limit the number of people who would want to participate. But I also don't know that I think there might be some value to people in actually having one source of media that shows up on their doorstep that doesn't have advertising in it. I certainly know that if I weren't on city council, I wouldn't get the Gazette if I could help it because of the advertising. And I know other people do, feel the same way about it.
Councilmember Daniels-Kahn.
I also thought that Councilmember Siemens' idea to reformat was interesting. The newsletter actually looks more interesting because it's got the green on it recently. I noticed that. But I think, and I'm sure that it's less expensive to print on newsprint than on paper. I just, it's all about cost, but maybe it can stay on newsprint, and then that may be what's causing it for people to think it's a newspaper. I don't know. I don't know the answer. But I'd like to see us look into changing it so more people read it. I know we'd like to believe a lot of people read it. I'm not sure about a lot.
Survey says they do.
I know the survey says they do, but somehow out of 7,000 copies that went out with the the Washington Adventist Hospital information in it, they only got, 500-plus responses. And I don't know why it got lost in the inside somehow, but they didn't. I'd just like to see it happen. I don't know about the advertising. The Survival Guide is not free advertising. You have to pay. If you want to be in the Survival Guide, you get to support them, and that's okay too. Free advertising. I'm with Councilmember Mayo. Part of the reason I don't like the Gazette is you have to plow through. I don't like Vanity Fair anymore either. You have to plow through ads, to get to George Clooney or something. So
I stopped reading Vanity Fair as well.
He does not reading it anymore.
Ever since they put George Clooney.
But that's what floats the boat. That's what makes any magazine or newspaper able to continue to produce, is how much advertising they can sell and what their circulation is.
Councilmember Schultz.
The newspaper, The Voice, I've been told now, is going to abandon itself, abandon its being a hard copy newspaper and resort to being just an online, quote, newspaper, which of course is an oxymoron, an online newspaper. This is no paper. Because of the reason I'm told, and I may be wrong, of an inability to get adequate advertising during this recession. It seems to me if the city's going to get into the business of providing free advertising, that is going to make it even harder for The Voice to even get online advertising, or for the Gazette to get news advertising. I'm not sure that it's the right thing for the city to be providing free advertising to businesses, because then they're not going to pay for advertising elsewhere, and you're going to, you're going to undercut other publications that rely on advertising, and I don't want to put us in that position. Businesses have news organizations, the Vanity Fairs and the Voices of this world are all competing for a shrinking source of revenue. So I'd be opposed to providing free advertising. I'd also be opposed to it because there's probably several thousand businesses in Tacoma Park. And you count all the home-based businesses plus all the retail businesses, and when you start giving away free advertising, there's costs to doing the layout and the paper. And pretty soon this would become a financial black hole for the city to be publishing ads that would involve, I don't know how you would sort it out in terms of who gets the chance to advertise for free and who doesn't. And I don't know, we have a very small newsletter staff as it is. Virginia Myers is it. Plus, I guess she has some people that do the work as stringers. And I think that it ought to be kept that size. As far as the format's concerned, I think readability is what we're all concerned about, but I'm not hearing any evidence for or in favor that tells me that a newsletter format, which presumably would be something like these things, where you have a staple in the corner or where you have folded paper, is more readable or less readable than a news format. I think we're just guessing that it might be, but until somebody who has experience with this sort of thing, why would we go through all the process of changing because we happen to think, oh, it'll be more readable? I don't know that it would be more readable. I find personally, and I'm just one person, that format, like a newspaper, is eminently readable. But I may be completely wrong. I mean, Terry may be completely right on this thing. But I guess I just don't see the point of wasting a lot of time unless we've got some evidence that doing it a certain way is going to get people to more people to read a newsletter than we have now. Because it may be that it's the content that because frankly the newspaper is not Vanity Fair. It's not full of pretty pictures of pretty people.
It's our pictures.
Councilmember Grimes.
There are pictures, right.
I said it's our picture. Thank you. I have an observation which I'll follow by a proposal that I'll follow by a comment. The observation is that we've drifted pretty far from the topic that kicked this off, the topic that was discussed at an earlier meeting, which was the appearance of the city newsletter. The previous meeting, a council member said that the newsletter looks like a newspaper rather than a city information sheet. I would propose that we bring the discussion back just to that topic, that we focus on the appearance, and that we move the discussion of how the city should communicate on a regular basis with residents through a channel of this nature to a later discussion when we would talk about strategic directions, as we talked about a few minutes ago, at a later meeting. The comment I want to make relates to the Tacoma Voice. I hear what Councilmember Schultz said about the competition that advertising would create for the Voice and for other commercial news outlets. And advertising is complicated, and that's all I'll say about that right now. But the Voice's transition to online only is motivated by more than just economic pressures. It's motivated in very large part by the changing nature of how news is produced and how it's consumed. News cycles are 24 hours a day, where we have a city newsletter that comes out once a month, and the deadline for a given month's issue will be on the 20th or 21st of the previous month. Our city newsletter, as it is right now, is not timely. It's good for putting out notices, it's good for putting out analytical or reflective articles, and so on. And maybe we do need to move toward a news dissemination vehicle that will be much more timely, that will not be constrained by a monthly cycle, that will not have deadlines of 10 days or 2 weeks in advance of publication date. But once again, I would propose that's for a later meeting, and I think personally that we should come back to just the appearance of the newsletter for right now.
And I'll just make a couple quick comments. The whole discussion of the city newsletter, I can't help but recall, I've been part of at least 2 major discussions of the newsletter, and probably more like 3, and I'm not sure of the number because each of them was painful, and therefore I don't particularly want to recall them, but I do because they were seared into everyone's brains who was around at the time. And let me just caution that any change to the newsletter has the potential for turning into a much wider discussion with much more passion than anything we've talked about in a long time. If the past is any judge, it will put discussions such as 410 MOUs and potential widening of a state highway into the category of, oh, that was easy, that was simple, that was calm.
Better watch out, Gilbert's listening.
So I tread on changes to the newsletter with great trepidation. I'll observe that I think that at least my own observation of the current format of the newsletter is that I'm much more likely to read it than I ever was in the past. In the last maybe, I don't know, year or 2, I'm not sure I could quite come up with the specifics, but the format has made it much more attractive to me to read. I don't mind advertising in things like the Gazette. I'm happy to get the Gazette. It's a source for news that I don't get other places, and I can ignore the advertising with the best of them. And the survey, if I recall correctly, the past surveys that we've done of the city which we've said that we want to do another one in the coming fiscal year, had questions about the newsletter, and if I recall correctly, it was the main source for where the majority of the city got their information. And so it's been doing a pretty good job of disseminating some information, and if we decided we wanted to change it, a way to get feedback on how that might best be received with some possible changes mentioned would be to put some of that in the survey and get that information. So I think there are further discussions that could be had. Do we want to give the city manager direction to consider modifying the format? How many are in favor of her considering that and putting a budget together? I see one. So maybe we'll have some further discussions about that as we discuss an upcoming survey.
As a follow-up to the council's discussion of the large grant applications, there were two that council members mentioned to varying degrees that you might possibly consider it if you had more information. So we had followed up. One of those was Washington Adventist University. They had requested $4,000 for construction of a rain garden in the courtyard of one of their residence halls. There was some back and forth on the council whether or not the rain garden would be accessible to the public, and the answer is generally not, that it could be done by appointment. So I just wanted, my sense of the council's discussion was that if it was not generally available to the public or accessible, that you would not be inclined to fund this particular project, but I did just want to give you this additional information and get a sense of what the council's pleasure was.
Anybody wish to change from, no, we don't want to fund that one, or advise to fund that one?
I'm leaning to yes, but I'm probably the only one.
Councilmember Grimes.
My observation about the Washington Adventist Hospital, my evaluation was based on a number of factors, and...
This is the university, not the hospital.
Sorry, Washington Adventist University, thank you, was based on a number of factors, and public access was only one of them. Another of them was the width of community, the breadth of community impact, which I didn't see as great here, and then in addition, the resources that might otherwise be available from the institution in question, and those are the reasons that I would not fund this request.
Anybody want to advise the city manager to include that money in the budget? Okay.
That's me.
Besides Councilmember Snipper.
The other item, or grant application, had to do with the dance exchange. They had requested $20,000. The information in the packet is pretty much coming from them, just written up, slightly differently. But what they had indicated is they had three basic areas that they would fund if they were given the $20,000. There was artist support for leading classes and workshops, marketing support, and support for their team programming. What we had asked them to also clarify is if they did not get the full $20,000, what could you expect for reduced levels of funding? So they did provide that information in each of these three focus areas. In the interest of time, I won't go through it since you have it before you, but I was just trying to get a sense if there was any level of funding that you all wanted to provide to the dance exchange in FY13.
Let me just say that I thought the support for the team programming was the area that if we wanted to do something, that made the most sense since it would benefit this community and enhance the relationship with that organization. Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you. Yeah, I have the same observation about teen programming. Seeing this broken out here, and it's very helpful to have it broken out here, this looks pretty good, and I would support funding that, whether it's full or partial funding, full funding if we have the money available. I will mention that I sat down for the better part of an hour with the executive managing director or executive director Ellen Chenoweth of the Dance Exchange last Thursday, to talk about a number of things, including how they can increase their visibility and presence in the community. And we discussed, for instance, some of the stuff that's grouped here under marketing support, and for instance, the extensive email and use of social platforms such as Facebook here in Tacoma Park. I think there's a lot that an organization can do without spending money on ads to get the word out, and that's something that I personally committed to helping Ms. Chenoweth with. So I like Mayor Williams, the idea of supporting the teen programming.
Councilmember Mayo.
Thank you. I don't support this grant in general because it's just a basic function of an operation, providing dance classes. If we provide it this year, should we provide it next year and the year thereafter and every year in perpetuity? In contrast, if we are going to do something like that, if we are going to offer long-term support for arts, wouldn't it be better to have a more open process to solicit applications from anyone who would want support for a dance or song or music program? And so for me, just because this is the one that comes in the door, I just question this. If it was something new, if it was a new program, or if it had a very clearly time-limited dependence on us, I would be more inclined to support it, but I just don't see that.
Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm with Councilmember Mayo on this. I really would like to support the arts, but I don't think this is really quite the way to do it. I do like the teen programming, however, so I'd be persuaded to support. If the rest of the council was interested, I'd support that.
Councilmember Schultz.
When this came up originally, I offered support for the dance exchange, simply because it has changed its form, its intention a lot since its leadership changed. It is an organization that has broad notoriety. I mean, extremely broad notoriety, and so therefore it's an exceptional asset to Tacoma Park. And I think it's worth our time, some of our time and money to support it. Well, I know we do in this building a tremendous amount of cultural work. I don't think it's the city's job to be the sole source of this kind of stuff in the city of Tacoma Park, and we need to encourage and help other organizations do that. And I would agree with Councilman Mayo if this was like they're coming back year after year asking for the same money for the same purposes, but they're not doing that. Last year they requested a large grant and we turned them down completely. This year their request is completely different than what they asked for last year. So I would support the teen programming and also would support money to help them do marketing. And in terms of what Councilmember Grimes was saying, there are, in fact, he's correct, a lot of very inexpensive ways like web and having a good website, but an awful lot of people, I find, even in this modern day and age, don't look to those digital sources for information, and old-fashioned advertising, ads in newspapers and postcards and stuff that comes in the mail is still a vital source of information for an awful lot of people. And, we aren't into the digital age. There's a huge digital divide out there, and so I think it's important to help these organizations do that kind of advertising as well, so that the Dance Exchange can survive. That's why I would be willing to provide money for their marketing as well as the teen programming.
And I'd just like to provide a quick reminder that what the Dance Exchange is, I think, best known for has been going to communities around the world and working with the local community to kind of do a collaboration between the community and the Dance Exchange over whatever issues seem appropriate, so I could see them continuing to do that in a way, turning to their home community and doing something like that, and I think the teen programming would be an indicator that we're interested in making sure that they can do that. So do we have a sense that, I hear majority support for some level of support for the teen programming. I'm not sure I hear majority support for the other pieces of it. So maybe just a show of hands on the teen programming first. Okay. And any other, I'll just say generically, any of the rest of it, support for that. Okay, so I think we have our clear direction that we're now spreading the disease of the evening where everybody gets to be the sole vote for something, and it has spread from the middle, and it has reached all of the non-new council members. So, you all can still have a turn.
I was the only vote for Madaleno.
True, you get one too. So I think you have your direction on that one.
Is there a brief sense of the council of which level of funding they outlined? Obviously, that they could do a summer and winter teen institute at $5,000, a summer program at $2,500, or a several-day program at a lower level of funding. I mean, if there's not
Is there support? What's the support for 5,000?
Go for higher.
Well, there's five for at least five.
I have an option here
One more comment. These programs are not need-based, right? It's not the poor kids in Tacoma Park or surrounding areas that get the program. It's anyone.
My initial comment was not necessarily about the needs-based, but I would say, because this may echo for some of the more tenured council members, some discussion when we gave funding to the Mobile Med, is that they had to demonstrate that it was Tacoma Park residents being served. So, this would all be written up in a grant agreement that would come forward to the council for approval. I would suggest, if you're going to fund it, that they be serving Tacoma Park kids.
I'm just thinking
And whether or not there's need-based, that could be another criteria that you could add.
Councilmember Grimes.
May I volunteer the city council members communicate to Ms. Chenoweth at the Dance Exchange that you will help with outreach to members of the community who might not otherwise be reached by their programming.
Sure. Councilmember Daniels, go on.
Yikes. It says in your overview, the teens and the youth programs draw almost exclusively from the Tacoma Park community.
Right.
It doesn't mean that it's true, right?
No, I think the council, if it so chose, and once again, you could decide that at a later date, is you could simply say that the funding would only be used for participation of Tacoma Park youth. But those are details that could be worked out.
Okay.
Councilmember Siemens.
I would certainly like to see inclusion of some needs, and I would leave that to your discretion on how that be accomplished. But I would certainly agree with Councilmember Grimes' suggestion that I would be willing to help with the outreach to the community advertising. Thank you.
I would help too.
Okay, we've had offers of help. And at this point, all we're doing is giving advice to the city manager on what we think she should include in her budget, and we'll see what's in her budget. And we'll remember our discussion to see whether it matches with our requests or not.
I'll do my best. The next item is also a follow-up from January 30th, and Councilmember Siemens, we had some sort of consultation among staff to make sure we understood what you had suggested, so hopefully it's stated correctly. This has to do with the way the information that is presented to the council as part of the budget presentation. My understanding, Councilmember Siemens, and once again, please correct me if I'm wrong, was that if there was new staffing or programs that I included in my budget that you wanted to have available to you for your consideration, reductions totaling 120%. What we weren't certain of, as we went back and looked through the notes, is whether or not there's going to be certain staffing costs, for example, that just go up, health insurance. It's that you weren't talking about those time of budgetary increase, but simply new programs, new staffing. Is that correct? Okay. So once again, I think it was just trying to clarify, there was really not much discussion by anyone else on this issue. I think we just sort of moved on and wanted to know where the rest of the council was, because obviously, there was some additional work above and beyond what we typically do, and if the council's interested in that information, we're more than happy to provide it.
Comments, Councilmember Mayo.
Thank you. I'd be happy to see the information. I think it makes sense to look at costs as well, or opportunities for savings as well. Thank you.
And at the 120%?
Sure.
Other support for that notion? Councilmember Schultz.
I'm not sure I understand reducing funding by 120% from what?
My understanding, and Councilmember Siemens, please correct me if I'm misstating my understanding, is that, for example, if there was a new staff position that was proposed, which we did discuss several of those on January 30th, that cost, if it's going to use good round figures, that cost $100,000. What I understand Councilmember Siemens would like to see is, I don't know if you wanted those included or at least offsetting reductions totaling $120,000 that would be on perhaps some separate sheet or something that the council could consider. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I mean, obviously, if the council doesn't support the position, one option would be just simply to delete it from the recommended budget when it comes to you. But there's different ways of approaching issues.
Thank you.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you. And my reason for that is so often we don't look at, where are the opportunities for reductions, and I think this is a way that would force us to consider those. It certainly doesn't mean that, to pass one increase, so we would have to pass the decrease, but I think it makes us think of that as we move forward with the budget.
Additional comments?
Has Terry switched to the Tea Party? Did I say something wrong?
How many people would be in favor of the city manager providing corresponding cut proposals at 120% of any increase proposals? I see two. Councilmember Mayo, you still haven't had your singular one yet tonight. So.
I have had my singular one.
Have you?
I was the only vote on against funding the dance exchange.
Oh, okay. Next one.
The last issue that I had, and once again, certainly we're open to whatever other guidance the council would like to provide, had to do with the property tax rates. When we held the last work session on January 30th, we did not have the benefit of the information from the State Department, Maryland Department of Assessments and Taxation. That information was received and wasn't really a surprise. We will see, or projected to see, a slight increase in the estimated real property assessable base of about 1.5%. For those of you who do track this, the constant yield tax rate for the next fiscal year would be .5715. As a reminder, the tax rate in FY12 is 58 cents. So if the tax rate were to stay at 58 cents, going into next year, we estimate that we would realize about $169,000 increase in real property tax revenue, just because the assessable base is higher. Included as part of your agenda packet, it is the very last page, would provide some historical data of what we have generated in revenues from each of the property taxes that the city levies. Those would be the real property tax rate, the personal property, and the railroad and public utilities, and what 1 penny on each of those sources at the current tax rates would generate. So really just looking this evening to see if there's any more guidance that council wishes to give me going into my budget preparation on each of these tax rates.
And for the railroad and utilities and personal property tax, there was some discussion about whether they would, whether we thought they should hold at the 2.5 times the property tax rate, or whether they might change from that, and if they might change independently from that, you know, as opposed to both of them remaining in lockstep.
That's correct.
And I'm in favor of considering, of having the city manager make a proposal to change those, and if we did that, would you like us to suggest guidelines for how those might change, or is a direction to just consider not sticking with the 2.5 times rate sufficient?
I think if the council has a specific idea in mind beyond, say, the 2.5 times, whether that's going up or down on either of those, that would certainly be helpful. If there's not a clear consensus on the part of the council, but you're more comfortable providing general guidance, that's helpful as well.
Because my sense in thinking about that was that, in particular, the railroad and public utilities one could go up. I'm not sure about the personal property rate, given where my sense of where businesses are in the city, that might not be the good way to go, but the railroad and utilities might go up.
The only thing I would just mention, and I'm not trying to suggest any course of action, is just particularly on public utilities, you will likely see those utility companies passing on any tax increase to their customers. That's a possibility.
But would they pass them along to their customers in just little old tiny Tacoma Park as opposed to more broad rate case?
That's correct. And I think that's a question mark.
And I'm tempted to think that they might not. Councilor Grimes.
My predilection, my preference would be status quo, but that's not strongly held. Mainly, I asked for the floor because I wanted to ask if you had any thoughts about when we would find out about intergovernmental funding sources, the state highway user funds, the county tax duplication, and other payments. Do you have dates in mind that you would expect we'd hear?
At the meet and confer with the county executive a couple of weeks ago, he had indicated that his goal was to try to advise the municipalities of his position on tax duplication payments no later than March 9th. As a reminder, he delivers his budget, or issues his budget to the county council on March 15th. I have reached out to some folks at the county staff trying to get information on some of the other revenue sources, and I've not yet heard back.
That would be the other revenue sources being which?
There would be a couple. We do get the operating grant for the New Hampshire Avenue Recreation Center, which has been significantly cut over the years. Library aid, as a reminder, for fiscal year 11 and fiscal year 12, the county council actually passed legislation that essentially gave them the right to ignore the formula for fiscal year 11 and fiscal year 2012. In talking to some of the county OMB staff, it's not clear at this time to them if there's going to be a move to keep that legislation in play, or it's going to be allowed to sunset. That piece of legislation, I believe, Councilmember Leventhal was the head of the committee at that time that took that legislation and kind of spearheaded it, if you will. He's no longer on that committee, I believe, but anyway, that's a question mark. If that legislation were allowed just to sunset, to expire, I think just based on the increase in the assessable base, we would see probably a modest increase of probably $10,000 or so in the library aid payment. The other figure that there has been no change in the county's position on, that I have requested data from the county staff, and I think if that's available, they'll provide it soon, has to do with the other piece of the puzzle on the Tacoma Park Police payment. It's not just the municipal tax duplication payment. There's a provision in the county code that it's a function of a certain tax rate and the city's assessable base, and that has been an area where we have seen some growth. I'm hoping, Councilmember Grimes, that someone on the county staff has already calculated those figures and will be able to get those to me later this week. In terms of highway user revenues, Mayor Williams may want to speak to this more, but we certainly know what was in the governor's budget. Obviously, there's legislative activities surrounding highway user revenues. But I think time will tell.
I would say we will know where we stand on highway user revenues at Sinai, and that's April, 11th, somewhere in there.
At this point in time, we expect to see state police protection aid be flat. Once again, that's been the position of the governor. The other thing that we're spending quite a bit of time looking at, Yvonne and I talked about this earlier, income taxes are always notoriously difficult to project. There are some complications that we've kind of learned of in terms of some changes and some things, just the way the formula is applied. I was in touch via email today with the chief economist for the county, who has always been very helpful in sharing data. And so that's just sort of a wild card. We're still trying to figure that out. Yvonne has a call into someone at the state. My guess would be that this year we'll probably see income taxes much higher than we had projected, but at least on the information that we have at this time, it's considered sort of a temporary aberration, and what we're being told is that if you rely on that increase as an indication of what's going to happen in the future, you would find revenues grossly overstated. So we're going to continue trying to refine that number. So I guess in a nutshell, Councilmember Grimes, there's still a lot of numbers in play and probably will be in play for another couple of weeks. And longer than that.
Yeah, there's just a quick, would you remind particularly the new council members that the tax rate has to be set essentially way before the budget, so this is
It doesn't have to be set way before the budget. What Councilmember Snipper is referring to is we do bill our property taxes, as you all know, through the county. So even though you really could wait longer from a practical standpoint to pass the budget closer to July 1st when the fiscal year starts, we have to give the county these specific tax rates to be billed by the end of May. And from a practical standpoint, given that so much of our revenue is coming from property taxes, I would encourage you to sort of link those two things.
And that drives the schedule in the rolling agenda for first and second reading of the budget.
All right. The other, just kind of from a, and you may have been alluding to this as well, Councilmember Snipper, part of the constant yield tax rate legislation requires a jurisdiction, if you're going to essentially enact a tax rate that exceeds the constant yield tax rate, there is just a process that has to be followed. There has to be a public hearing and notice given. So we're not trying to presume what the council will or will not do, but if you look at the rolling agenda, there's a tentative public hearing in the event that the council did wish to enact a real property tax rate that exceeds the constant yield rate.
And as you've indicated in here in the calculation, we would be, if we kept it at 58 cents, we'd be slightly above, so we would have to follow that.
That's correct.
That procedure.
What we've seen happening over the years, which is not a surprise, is the variance between the constant yield rate and the city's tax rate has been getting narrower and narrower, and what that basically means is that taxable values are coming into line with actual assessed values, and it has to do with the phase-in of the 10% cap.
Councilmember Schultz.
If I recall correctly, when we had this public hearing that you just referred to last year on the constant yield tax rate, there was nobody that showed up for the public hearing to testify, which is okay. It just sort of indicates that it wasn't high on the minds or the agendas of residents, the constant yield tax rate. Probably, I think, because a lot of people just simply don't understand it conceptually. I think when you start talking about raising the actual rate, then that's when people start getting jumpy.
Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you, Mayor. I assume we can comment on the tax rate?
Sure.
Okay. Particularly your proposal, which I found very intriguing. I was trying to think how to address the issue you were raising, but I'm not too interested in raising the personal property tax especially, but I am more interested in the railroad and public utilities. So I hadn't realized that the simplest way to do it is just split the two of them up.
Sure.
Yeah. So I'd be supportive of exploring two different tax rates for those pieces, just as you suggested. And I'm in favor of keeping the real property tax rate at 58 cents.
Okay. And let me just say that my proposal to adjust the railroad and public utility rate, I'm not looking for a big change. I'm just looking for some modification. Councilmember Mayo.
Thank you. I support looking at the rates that were just discussed, rate changes. We could, however, try to see whether we could look at the railroad and the utility tax to bring in the revenue that would be brought in if we kept the rate at 58 cents per mil, or 58 mils. So as opposed to going through the process, keeping the rate at a constant yield, but making up what would have been the projected revenue from going to 58 cents, or keeping it at 58 from these other taxes. I mean, the hard thing is we don't know whether we need the money, right? We have no idea whether we need $100,000 more, or $400,000 more, or $1 million more, or $1 million less.
And we will know when the city manager reveals her proposed budget.
Correct.
And just a reminder that if we did that, we would have to essentially double the rate for railroad and public utilities.
That would be quite dramatic.
Since it's only bringing in currently $162,000, or projected to bring in at the current rate. Other comments? So, guidance to the city manager on the real property rate. I've heard some discussion of keeping it the same. Have I heard other proposals? All those in favor of giving guidance to keep it constant at 58 cents? Well, that's unanimous.
Even Sarah Palin.
My proposal for leaving the personal property revenue rate the same, and an increase of some kind in the railroad and public utilities rate. People in favor of that one? Unanimous on that one? Okay. Do we have anything else to go over in this?
Those were the only issues that I wanted to follow up on. Once again, if there's any discussion that the council itself wants to have or guidance it wants to provide outside of the issues that we just discussed, that would certainly be welcome.
Councilmember Siemens wants us to keep going at 11:10.
No, I would just ask that since the earlier suggestion didn't gain good support for 120% reduction of, proposals for reductions at the 120% level, that we still should ask the city manager for some proposed reductions in the budget. For specific.
Are you thinking of like a list of, if you want to cut something, here's my top priority list?
Yes. Sure.
People in favor of that? Unanimous on that one? Okay.
Thank you. We all love you. I had to go home with something.
Oh, I thought you were going home with Sarah Palin. We're adjourned.
Love it.